The story begins with a dialogue between two unknown people, a man and a woman. The stranger says that the situation is under control, and if anyone tries to break in, she will find out everything. However, the woman doesn't have time to finish speaking because a portal appears out of nowhere and a bullet flies out, killing her and disturbing everyone else. Behind all this stands the main character, a young man who admits to himself that he became a criminal against his will. A month ago, a young man named Callum Wells was detained by officers of the Guild of Magical Regulation. The protagonist doesn't understand why this happened, and the guild agent, Taryn, explains that Callum was detained on suspicion of involvement in the attack on the fitness center. The protagonist is perplexed, and the agent adds that the situation is serious. The Dragonborn has broken free, and Wells is the only witness. Callum listens to this information in shock, realizing that he is being told outright that magic exists. Taryn asks the guy where he was this morning, and Callum replies that he was at his mother's funeral and met a strange man who had an unusual aura. Wells admits that he has already met similar people from whom an otherworldly presence emanated. After that, Callum went to the gym, where one of the owners is an equally unusual man, Mr. Shahai. The protagonist saw the otherworldly aura of the man, the red dragon, but tried not to show it. Shahai greets the protagonist and asks Callum to do him a favor. A new girl, Marie, has come to the gym and she needs help getting used to the gym. The guy approaches the girl and greets her, realizing that Shahai is trying to introduce the main character to every visitor to the hall after the death of Wells's wife. Before Marie can voice her request, she faints and Callum bends down to see what is wrong. Immediately, strangers burst into the hall and noise erupts in the fitness room. Shahai shouts to the main character and lies down on the floor, while the ill-wishers start shooting and the bullets hit Shahai. Callum tries to stay conscious and sees Shahai fending off his opponents. In an instant, the guy passes out, but a little later, he comes to in a burning building. Wells sees Marie unconscious next to him and lifts her up so they can escape the fire together. The guy says to himself that he won't let the girl die, just like that. It's hard for Callum, but he doesn't stop and continues to move forward, realizing that he can't die here. Suddenly, a moment later, the protagonist and the girl find themselves outside, and Wells does not understand how this happened. Suddenly, an unknown person who was present at the funeral of the hero's mother approaches the guy and tells Callum to stand still. A man, a magician, puts out a fire with water using his powers. Wells, watching this from the outside, is surprised and does not believe what is happening. The mage approaches the young man and asks who he is, to which Callum asks the man what just happened. The mage says he discovered dragonfire in a fitness center where there is one victim, one witness, and the perpetrator has escaped. Unexpectedly, the magician asks Wells what his classification is, but the guy does not understand what he is being asked about. Callum says that if the mage doesn't explain anything clearly, the guy won't ask questions. Suddenly, a stranger puts handcuffs on Callum and arrests him. Hours later, the protagonist finds himself being interrogated at the Magic Regulation Guild. Taryn, talking to the mage, says it's amazing Callum has stayed conscious for so long. Among themselves, the men think and assume that Wells is an ordinary person. However, the security system was supposed to knock out every normal person in the gym, and only Callum survived and was not affected by the system. After reviewing the information about the guy, the GMR workers are surprised that in 30 years of his life, Wells was never included on the list of magicians and lived an ordinary life. By now, Taryn has finished explaining to Callum what happened and concludes that Wells is not to blame for the situation that has occurred. A GMR worker says that testing and registration must be carried out in the near future in order to determine where the main character can be assigned. Taryn explains that typically every mage works for the Magic Regulation Guild, and most often, people with abilities join the guild at an early age. Callum begins by saying that he leads an ordinary life, works as an architect, and has his own clients. Taryn interrupts the protagonist and says that once the guy figures out his magical skills, he will be able to find a much better job. Wells says that he apparently has no choice and asks the guild worker if he can forget the incident as a bad dream. Theron replies that the guild hunts down deserters and executes them upon capture, and these words frighten Callum. Sometime later, the hero finds himself in a testing room to obtain information about himself. Responsible specialists stand in front of him, and Wells, looking at them, understands that after the testing, he will be taken under control. The young man is angry that the guild does not give him any choice, and decides to himself that he will not give up so easily. Taryn asks the protagonist if he is ready to begin testing, and the guy asks what it is. Wells is under a special installation, which, according to Taryn, will begin to pour mana into the guy. Callum looks at the device with disbelief and asks how long the testing will take. Hearing that the experiment will last a few seconds, Callum tenses up because he doesn't feel anything yet. Immediately, the hero's body is pierced by severe pain, and he asks to stop the test. But the specialists assure him that it is almost over, and the guy loses consciousness. After Callum comes to, he asks Taryn if this is supposed to happen, to which the HMR worker replies that due to the boy's age, his body reacted this way. Taryn immediately says that while Wells was unconscious, specialists managed to apply a magical mark to him. The guy looks at his hand and sees an unusual symbol and thinks to himself that GMR is clearly not the type of person who cares about freedom. Taryn tells the protagonist that he will most likely need a mentor, as mages of this type are rare. Callum is unhappy and asks if he can go home and get his affairs in order before everything starts. Taryn replies that Sen will be accompanying the protagonist for the next week until Wells is assigned. On the way home, Callum tries to get his escort to talk and wants to know where he might be assigned. Finally, Sen suggests that the guy will most likely be assigned to the transportation department since spatial magic is not offensive. Sen himself says that he is a pyromancer, which is why he is often sent to the front lines, and he also has some knowledge of aeromancy. The protagonist asks what exactly the guild fights for, and the GMR agent explains that they most often hunt criminal mages or send fighters to the front lines in the worlds of the 6 portals. Each world has its own supernatural beings, and worlds supply each other with energy, mana. Upon arriving home, Sen gives the protagonist some materials on magic and says that he will take him back to the GMR headquarters tomorrow. Callum sits down at his desk and begins to review the information provided by the GMR agents. Mana is an energy similar to the atmosphere, from which magicians get their powers, and a magician's own mana is called vis, which has its own specifics. Wells leans back in his chair and realizes how little he knows about the system of magic. The guy decides to practice, picks up a pen on the table, and is going to use magic on it. With great focus, Callum manages to move the object, causing the pen to hit the ceiling. Wells realizes that he was using crude mana-based magic just now, so he should practice his vis. Looking at the tattoo on his arm, Callum thinks that working for GMR isn't such a bad idea, since he can train there, but first he needs to find out what they want from him. After some thought, the protagonist decides to Google information about the Magic Regulation Guild. Right there, Callum finds information about the mortality rate in the guild, which exceeds 50%. Almost all deaths occur among mages who do not work for large families or the guild itself. After reading information about archmages also working for the guild, Wells decides that he does not want to work with the guild. The protagonist is angry that the guild is simply crushing everyone under its control, depriving them of freedom. The guy decides to hide from the guild and opens a safe with money to ensure his escape. Having packed his bag, Callum jumps out of the window, and Sen, who is guarding the main character, comes running to the noise. The GMR agent is angry that the magician escaped from under his nose and is preparing to catch him. Wells runs out into the noisy street, hoping he's gotten away from Sen, but he knows it's too early to relax. Callum remembers the agent's words about Sen being able to control fire and air, which would make the situation much worse. Sen uses the air to move quickly and looks out for the protagonist, knowing that if Wells escapes, the guild will send a stronger mage to search for the criminal. Having risen even higher, the GMR agent considers that it might be worth reporting the escape to the guild to Agent Taryn, but then abandons this idea since his reputation is at stake. A moment later, Sen finds Callum, and the protagonist speeds up to escape. People passing by notice that the wind in the area has noticeably increased. Callum is nervous that no one else on the street sees San, but he does, and he thinks about how he can get away from the agent. The protagonist turns into a store to change clothes, and Sen stops on the street to look around. A moment later, a GMR agent stops a young man passing by, thinking it is Wells, but it is a stranger. Nearby, Sen finds the bag abandoned by the main character and realizes that he has lost Callum. Meanwhile, the protagonist catches a taxi and goes to Wesley's farm. Arriving there, Wells rented a corncob, hoping to be as far from home as possible by morning. Later, going to the restroom, the young man is busy cutting and dyeing his hair to at least slightly change his appearance. Entering a small pawn shop, Callum meets an orc salesman who asks how he can help. Wells asks to change his ID and issue new documents in exchange for 2,000 and a laptop. Meanwhile, at the protagonist's old apartment, Taryn scolds San for Callum running away. Theron is nervous, saying that Archmage Duvala won't like the situation since she wanted to start training with the guy tomorrow. The apartment is also examined by a magician who was at Wells' mother's funeral, and he says that the protagonist's escape is not surprising. Taryn taunts the mage, Jean, saying that now is not the time for jokes and that he needs to think about how to present the situation to the Archmage. Sometime later, Jean reports to Duvala, reporting that Callum has escaped, and the news angers the Archmage. The magician tells the woman that he even asked werewolves and vampires for help, but they are notoriously difficult to deal with. Jean begins to justify himself, saying that most likely the main character just wants to live an ordinary life, since learning spatial magic is very difficult. Duvala becomes even more angry, saying that Callum is now a criminal mage. Finally, the Archmage says that he hopes that the protagonist will be found soon, because criminals must be punished immediately. Meanwhile, the main character arrives in a small town where he is going to buy real estate, and he is met by a girl, Jessica, and her father, Sheriff Arthur Langley. After getting acquainted, all three go into the house, and Callum says how quiet and cozy it is inside, and that the guy will be able to keep himself busy with repairs. Jessica smiles and says that Callum looks too young to be doing something like that. Wells smiles and tells the girl that he needs to relax a little and improve his health. The girl admits that she has been trying to sell this house for a long time, but she doesn't have many buyers. The protagonist replies that it is beneficial and best for him. The next day, Callum sits in the house and thinks about the future, realizing that he has enough money, but he needs to learn more about magic. It's only a matter of time before the GMR agents come for him, so Wells needs to study as much spatial magic as possible. As he goes outside to practice, Callum reflects that he can't cope without the help of a teacher. He needs discipline and control. The guy opened his first portal by accident, so now Callum tries to use magic intentionally. Finally, the young man manages to create a portal and pass through it, and after that, he begins to think about how else he can use magic. Sometime later, in the shower, Callum uses the portal to help and save himself time. For example, he creates portals to reach shampoo cans in the shower. Sometime later, Wells trains to form a vis sphere, a skill taught to mages early on. After creating a sphere of energy, Callum admits that although it's useless, the ball looks cool. Later, the protagonist trains gravity kinesis to manipulate objects on the surface. At the end of the week, the boy sits outside and concentrates his efforts to learn to see with his eyes closed. The hero also manages to see through things, but this requires a lot of effort. Suddenly, Jessica arrives at Callum's house and the guy rushes to meet the girl. Jessica says the school year is starting soon and a lot of people will be cutting through Wells' yard. Callum smiles and says it's no big deal. He hasn't cleared the yard completely. Jessica reassures the young man and says that the local children will help him because they love spending time outdoors. As she leaves, the girl says that she lives nearby and Callum can come visit. As Jessica leaves, Callum nervously scans the area, realizing that the energy is hanging from him everywhere, so he urgently needs to find a way to get rid of the mana. Meanwhile, at the GMR headquarters, a specialist approaches Taryn with the main character's test results and says that, apparently, Callum has never used magic before. However, there were some anomalies in the test results. Callum was able to dispel 100 thams of mana. Thus, the protagonist was able to absorb 97 thoms before a special bracelet was placed on him. The specialist explains that an ordinary beginner would hardly be able to withstand such an amount of mana. The girl also added that if Wells had never used magic before, then his vis reserve should be full. She admits that she doesn't know what this peculiarity is connected with, but assumes that it is because the magician has never used magic for a long time. At this moment, the protagonist is at home using his VS energy to learn to hide himself. By forcing the energy into the bearing, Callum realizes that he can now easily cover his tracks, making it harder for the GMR to track him. The guy is glad that he is gradually gaining magical knowledge on his own, but inside, he still feels empty. Wells remembers his family, his hometown, and misses happy times. However, the hero immediately pulls himself together, saying that he needs to move forward and not think about the past. Therefore, the hero decides to learn more about the city he has arrived in and goes to a local store where he is met by a girl. While Wells and the girl are having a formal conversation, Callum feels a strange sensation coming from the basement. Concentrating, the guy feels a dog the size of a human and is surprised to himself. Suddenly, a man greets the guy, and turning around, Wells sees Sheriff Langley in front of him. The man says his niece, Clara, cooks the best steaks and turns to the girl behind the cash register. While Clara is busy at the cash register, Langley is talking to Callum. Unexpectedly, the sheriff mentions respect for other people's territory, and Wells is uneasy at the man's tone. The sheriff leans towards the protagonist and says that he has recently come across some suspicious guys, so if Callum sees anything, he should let him know. The protagonist tells the sheriff that he also looks strange, and whether Langley really warned other people about him. The sheriff admits that he was initially suspicious of the guy, but later realized that Wells did not pose a danger. While Callum is wondering who Langley warned him about, Clara delivers the protagonist's order and distracts him. Arriving home, the guy examines his mark on his hand and thinks that it was through it that the GMR agents could have tracked him. Therefore, the main character decides to get rid of the tattoo and remove it with the help of magic. After removing the ink, Callum throws it into the burning fireplace. The next day, Wells sits down at her desk to study the vis and her abilities even more. Now the guy needs to come up with a strategy for using the vis, and a system similar to a power bank for a phone comes to mind. So, Callum will constantly recharge his vis, and if he needs to quickly escape somewhere, he will use the reserve. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door, and using his skills, the guy feels 2 police officers behind the door. Wells steps out onto the porch and greets the sheriff, asking what brings him here. Langley apologizes for the sudden visit and says he needs to ask a couple of questions, and Langley asks where the guy was last night. Early at night, the protagonist lay in bed and analyzed the city he was staying in. Remembering the big dog and the conversation about territories, Callum guesses that the sheriff's family are werewolves. However, remembering Langley, Wells cannot understand what the man wanted to warn him about. While the guy was thinking about all this, some sounds were heard outside the house. Leaving the house with a flashlight, the protagonist finds no one and goes back home. The sheriff explains that there is no need to be angry at such a question. It is just a formality. When Callum replies that he was just sleeping, Langley demands proof of this. Wells is tense, but the sheriff reassures him, saying that Callum is not on the suspect list. Callum doesn't have any security cameras, and even if he did, he wouldn't give anyone access to them due to the fact that he often practices magic in his backyard. Police say someone broke into a neighboring house, but Wells apparently didn't hear anything. The hero understands that, because of the GMR and other things, the protagonist has completely forgotten about ordinary killers. So Callum says he heard strange sounds from a large beast last night. Langley thanks the protagonist for the information received and says that he will contact Wells if new details are revealed. Getting into the car, the sheriff says that they actually know who the criminal is, but he still hoped that it was not true. Langley bitterly states that things in the town are getting darker and darker. At the office, the sheriff gets angry with the vampire who came to him, and they sort things out over territory. Langley claims that one of the wolves was killed by vampires, and is unhappy that the vampires tried to make it look like they had nothing to do with it. The vampire throws up his hands and says that he doesn't understand what his fault is, since it was the wolves who violated the territory. The sheriff gets angry at his interlocutor, saying that before his arrival, there were no vampires in these circles at all. The vampire states that if the pack is going to challenge them, they will gladly accept it. Langley finally loses his temper and chases the vampire out of his office. Sometime later, Langley talks to his daughter and tells her that vampires killed a peaceful person. The sheriff gets angry and says he wants to drive the vampires out of town forever and send them far away. A certain Chester, an alpha, calls on the phone and says that without proof, the GMR will defend the vampires, so he will send his people from the pack to help. Alpha reports that a similar situation with vampires has developed not only in this city, Vinute, but also in 5 neighboring ones, and most likely there is something more serious behind it. In the end, Chester says that they need to act carefully, and if the sheriff manages to catch the criminals red-handed, then the pack will be destroyed. The protagonist is at this moment in a local store and silently says to himself that he needs to be careful, realizing that due to the unstable situation in the city, the guy might have to leave the city in the near future. Callum is upset because he spent a lot of money on the house. Wells hoped that he could sell enchanted items to make some money, but to do so, he would need to overcome a number of serious restrictions. In any case, sales sites require registration, which is a direct path to being discovered. Before doing anything, the protagonist puts up a barrier around the house to protect himself. At first, Callum had the idea of casting a spell that would reflect bullets, but it wouldn't last long, so he changed his mind. Later, the young man buys a gun to protect himself from what is happening in the city. As Callum examines the weapon, he wonders how effective regular bullets are against the supernatural. Not far from him in the store, the protagonist notices Sheriff Langley's daughters examining hammers. Wells approaches the girls, and they are frightened by the unexpected appearance of the young man. Callum apologizes and asks if the girls are scared about the situation in the city. Jessica talks about the victim, a woman, and Wells asks, puzzled, who she is talking about. Jessica approaches the guy and tells him that there was another murder last night. The girls share with the protagonist that they plan to close the cafe for a while until the situation calms down. Callum sympathizes with the girls and says that if they need help, he is ready to provide it. As he leaves the store, Callum silently notes that things are bad because this means there is a serial killer in town. Langley loves their small town, so they're unlikely to let the GMR go roaming around looking for the criminal. Having independently studied everything necessary for the investigation, Callum realized that all the murders took place near his home, and most likely there would be another murder. Therefore, there are 2 dangers for the main character, a criminal in the city and GMR agents who may be sent to investigate. Therefore, the protagonist decides to prepare in advance for all possible scenarios in order to protect himself. Callum's spatial awareness has also improved, so if he tries hard enough, he can see what's going on in the city itself. The next morning, the hero is awakened by an unexpected noise outside, and Wells nervously picks up his weapon. Using his intuition, the protagonist discovers a frightened Jessica and understands that something must have happened. Callum realizes to himself that next time he needs to be more careful with his mana use. He opens the door to the girl and asks what happened. Jessica immediately screams that the young man should help her. During the night, the vampires kidnapped Clara and are still holding her captive. At night, when Clara returned home, vampires were watching her. And a little later, they drove the girl into a dead end and, using hypnosis, took her away with them. Jessica cries and repeats that Callum promised to help them, which puts the protagonist at a disadvantage. Wells seriously considers whether he should reveal his identity to Jessica, so he invites the girl inside the house. Inside, Callum questions Jessica about Clara being captured and not killed. Wells understands that now he has no chance of defeating supernatural creatures in a fair fight. Jessica asks the protagonist for help, to which Callum replies that he needs more information to help. Some time later, the protagonist drives past the motel where Clara is being held captive, and the guy notes a strange feeling inside. After this, Jessica brings the guy to the department, saying that her family can help. Upon entering, Sheriff Langley attacks the girl, shouting at her about the misdeeds she had done. Langley shouts that they can't involve the GMR in this, and Callum sees how he has changed in appearance, looking more like a dog. The main character comes to the sheriff and proves that he is not from the GMR. Moving further into the department, Wells talks to the sheriff, asking for more information about the vampires. Langley explains that vampires have set up shop at a motel down the street and are trying to take over the werewolf territory. Also, as the werewolf suggests, the opponents brought a magician with them for support, and it was they who killed the two. Callum asks Langley about the bodies again, wondering if it was really vampires who did it. The sheriff explains that the pack is not strong enough to challenge the enemy, and besides, the agreements that no creature can attack each other without proof are very hampering. Callum is shocked by this injustice, outraged that because of the GMR, werewolves cannot fight back against vampires. Using his intuition, the protagonist searches for Clara at the motel. The girl allegedly went to the vampires of her own free will, but this is a complete lie. The protagonist asks what the werewolves will do after they bring Clara back. Langley replies that as soon as the girl is free, they will contact Chester so the Alpha can send the rest of the pack to help. Callum then asks how the werewolves are going to kill the vampires. The sheriff explains that you can use a Mordite weapon, which stops regeneration, or destroy the heart outright. Wells then asks what the situation is with firearms against the creatures. Langley says that the vampires' speed will make them harder to kill, and Callum, after some thought, agrees to help. A little later, the protagonist is assigned a prison cell so that he can prepare to rescue Clara. Langley says they don't have much time, to which the protagonist replies that 10 minutes will be enough. When the sheriff leaves, Callum wonders to himself what he's gotten himself into. However, remembering Clara, the guy understands that he cannot sit idly by. At this moment, the criminals who captured the girl are discussing among themselves why the werewolves have not yet begun to act. A moment later, the magician girl is killed by a bullet that flies out of the portal. A little earlier, the protagonist studied the abilities of portals to understand whether they could be used for combat purposes. After learning the basic information, Callum builds his own strategy. By using portals, Wells can kill enemies without having to use a shotgun directly. Once the guy has cleared the room of vampires, he only has a few seconds before reinforcements arrive, so he needs to act quickly. Using his intuition, the guy finds Clara and is going to transport her through the portal to a safe place. Having connected with the girl's vis, Callum still manages to pull her through the portal. Having picked up the girl, Wells is glad that everything worked out for him, because carrying people is not so easy for him. Immediately after this, reinforcements arrive at the motel and discover that the girl is missing. Callum opens the portals again and shoots the vampires one by one. With that done, Callum opens the door and Jessica runs in to see her sister. Langley is shocked that the protagonist dealt with the vampires so quickly and asks what the secret is. Callum reports that the creatures are dead and it would be best to send the fire department to the motel. The sheriff is surprised and says that he doesn't sense even a bit of magic from the guy. Callum doesn't want to answer the sheriff's questions anymore, so he advises Langley to hurry with the fire. Approaching the car, Callum is about to leave to rest and sort out the things taken from the vampires, but Jessica comes out to him. The young man asks if there should be a girl with Clara, to which Jessica replies that she wanted to thank the guy. The girl kisses the protagonist on the cheek and says goodbye to him, leaving Wells in confusion. Later, the sheriff contacts Chester, informing the Alpha that the vampire problem has been resolved. Langley says that no one in the pack started the fight. It was the man who offered his help, but in return demanded that they not ask unnecessary questions. The sheriff adds that, judging by the tattoo, the man is a magician, but there is no aura emanating from him. The vampires certainly won't be happy about this turn of events, but once they find out that the werewolves weren't involved, they won't be able to do anything about it. Looking at his daughters, Langley says the pack owes a lot to Callum. Later, the main character stands in the shower for a long time and does not understand what is wrong with him. Finally, the guy realizes that he is in trouble because he killed people. For a second, the protagonist considers that perhaps the GMR are right in imposing restrictions on people with abilities. However, Callum immediately realizes that if he had followed the guild's rules, Clara would still be in captivity. After the shower, the guy is furious that he did help the werewolves because Langley has no problem telling everything about Wells. If he had been smarter, he could have done everything without Jessica knowing. The next day, the sheriff comes alone to meet with the GMR agents. When he is informed that agents are already on site, the sheriff hopes that there is no vampire among them. Having gone down to the GMR agents, Langley meets with the magician, Ray, and the fairy Felicia. The sheriff greets the agents and says he hopes they can help them figure out what happened. Langley reports that the motel is still being dismantled and the area is being searched, but they have brought in several bodies for examination. After examining the bodies, Ray concludes that the wounds on them are approximately the same. The sheriff coughs and says that it is obvious that werewolves are not involved, and the pack does not know where such injuries could have come from. Felicia approaches the corpses and uses her skills to read the information. Having finished with this, the girl says that one of the corpses was sleeping and did not see anything. After examining the second body, the fairy concludes that the creature heard the shots, but did not have time to react to them. Ray objects, saying that someone must have heard and seen something important, but the girl denies this, saying that everyone was in a panic. The sheriff is nervous that the agents are noticing, but Langley defends himself, saying the situation is dire. The sheriff immediately says that he will arrange for the agents to be given a room and adds that he can take them there right now, but Ray objects, saying that they would like to interview several people in town. Agnet explains that there are now two possible scenarios, and in the first case, the perpetrator may not be from Vinuth, which complicates the task. And the second option, the criminal is a local resident, and perhaps the vampires themselves provoked him to attack. Langley immediately rushes to justify the city's residents, saying that there is no one here who could single-handedly cope with so many vampires. Meanwhile, the main character sits at home and looks at everything he was able to steal from the vampires. Among his findings, he discovers special bullets that could be useful in confronting supernatural creatures. The guy also finds ceramic slabs among all the items, which most likely belonged to the magician. The latest interesting find is 100,000 in cash, and the guy realizes that he needs to leave some for unexpected needs. Callum distributes his money so that each amount can last for a while if necessary. In addition, the hero needs to replenish his supplies of magical accessories. Looking at the magical slabs found earlier, Callum realizes that they were purchased from a special shop. Suddenly, the guy hears someone approaching the house and jumps up from his seat, amazed that he was spotted so quickly. However, upon opening the door, Wells discovers Jessica and Clara have come to see him. Jessica says that GMR agents have appeared in the city and are conducting an investigation. The girl's words alarm the guy. He didn't expect the guild to react so quickly to the situation that had happened. Clara personally thanks the protagonist for helping her and saving her, to which Callum reminds them that they must pretend that he is not involved. The girls give the main character food from the cafe as a thank you, because they knew that he most likely would not leave the house. Inviting the girls inside for tea, Callum asks them to tell him about the GMR agents who have arrived to investigate. Jessica says that it seems like one of them can communicate with the dead, to which the guy silently notes that he needs to remember this information. Clara adds that agents have been combing the motel all day, but everything there is burned down, so it is unlikely they will find anything. Jessica says Chester is worried that Callum's help could come at a cost. After revealing that Langley is under the command of the Midwest's Alpha, Chester, Clara is surprised that Callum didn't save her for profit. The guy smiles and says that the werewolves don't owe him anything, and he would prefer not to talk about what happened at all. Meanwhile, GMR agents arrived at the scene and asked if anything interesting had been discovered. One of the police officers presents the results of the study and says that a magical signature was noticed, but it is unlikely to help. After studying the document, Ray reveals that the vampires had an aeromancer mage on their side and that he was apparently the only mage present at the scene. The agent also receives a list of items stolen from the vampires and says that the council in Minneapolis will be furious at this news. As Ray leaves the crime scene, he shares with Felicia that the fire is very strange and the pack could easily have hired a cleanup team to ensure no one finds any traces. However, instead, ordinary people noticed everything earlier. Ray concludes that absolutely everyone is hiding something from them. The werewolves are pretending not to know about all this, which looks very unnatural. So Ray decides to use his powers to figure out what happened. Having received the necessary information, the agents arrive at Callum's house. Both show their IDs to the protagonist, who notes that the agents are stronger than vampires. Ray says they are investigating a case and need to ask some questions, to which Wells replies that it looks like he needs a lawyer. Felicia approaches the guy and, acting strangely, says that the hero doesn't need a lawyer. Then Ray leans over to Callum and asks if the guy knew there were vampires in the city. While Wells says he knows nothing, Felicia uses her skills to influence the hero and get answers. Callum is indignant, asking what he should say, as he only heard about the incident on the news. Suddenly, the agents turn around and walk away, leaving the guy alone. Before leaving the guy, Ray turns to Wells and asks the hero not to leave this judicial district. The man says Callum is the first suspect in the case. After the detectives leave, the protagonist packs his things to leave the city. Callum mentally apologizes to Jessica for having to leave town so quickly. However, the guy values his freedom more than anything else, and his life is at stake. On the way, the protagonist turns into a store by the highway and sees that the seller there is a werewolf. Wells says he needs a new ID and name, and the seller can help with that. The man is perplexed, but the protagonist hands him a gold bar and says that he also needs a car that is for sale near the store. The werewolf takes the ingot and says that he will try to help the guy. Sometime later, the seller hands the protagonist a new ID and car keys, adding that this ID should be enough. According to his ID, Callum is a professor, and before leaving, he asks where he can buy books on magic. After receiving a recommendation from the werewolf, the protagonist leaves the store and approaches the new car, wondering if Langley has noticed his disappearance. A few hours later, a portal opens near the werewolf shopkeeper, which frightens him. It is Callum. Through the werewolf, the protagonist asks to tell Chester that Clara's friend is safe. After speaking with the werewolf, Chester approaches his two charges, asking about Wells, and learns that both were with Langley when Callum joined his squad. Alpha Chester gives his charges the task of finding the main character by scent. Meanwhile, the GMR agents sit in the car and sort through the information they have collected, realizing that they have only one suspect, Wells. Felicia says that he can't be an ordinary person because he resisted her magic. Ray counters by saying that the hero could be a simple person who has been given a protection he knows nothing about. The girl replies that Callum is the prime suspect, especially since he lived next door to the vampire victims. Ray sighs and says that they don't have any other leads anyway. The agents arrive at the protagonist's house again, but realize that there is no one inside. Ray uses his magic to explore the premises, but both agents are struck by how unnaturally empty the house looks. A moment later, the man finds the used bearing that the protagonist used. While examining the object, Ray says that the metal is ordinary and does not retain any traces of magic. Felicia comes to the conclusion that if Callum is not a mage, he definitely knows someone unusual. Getting up, Ray says that it doesn't matter what happened now, because Wells will never come back here. While Felicia leaves to put the boy on the wanted list, Ray wonders what Sheriff Langley will say about the discovery. The next morning, the protagonist wakes up late in a new car. The guy understands how much stress he is under, because with every delay, the GMR agents are getting closer. Getting out of the car, Callum realizes that if he wants to continue to successfully hide, he needs to learn as much about magic as possible. Approaching the bookstore, the protagonist notes that the place looks abandoned. Inside, the decor resembles a typical bookstore. There's an old man sitting behind the cash register, sorting through books, and he exudes a magical signature. The salesman doesn't seem friendly, so Callum hesitates to talk to him. Looking at the assortment, the main character is shocked by the high prices for each product. Sometime later, the guy finds a magical treatise and realizes that it is worth spending money on. While Wells Wells is leafing through the book, he is distracted by the seller, who says that he needs to buy the books first and only then read them. The protagonist turns to the seller and asks if there is similar literature for beginning magicians. At first, the man does not want to help the young man, but later he uses magic to find the books. The main character begins to get his hands on a wide variety of literature for aspiring magicians. After this, the guy goes to the checkout and pays for 4 books, which cost over $1,000. As he leaves the store, Callum is upset that the shop assistant didn't give him his change. A few hours later, Chester's werewolves are on the protagonist's trail. Callum's scent is very weak. He can somehow hide his trail, but nevertheless, werewolves sense it. One of the wolves suggests asking the locals for help so they can tell us something about the guy based on the description. However, the other werewolf objects, saying that if the alpha wanted to cause a stir, he wouldn't have sent the 2 of them. Arriving at the parking lot, one of the werewolves suggests contacting someone who can track the guy through cameras. There's a certain Lucy. Hacking cameras is her specialty, and it's to her that the wolves decide to turn. Meanwhile, the protagonist looks through the books he bought and realizes that there isn't much good information in any of them. However, he managed to learn something about ceramic plates that can be used to cast complex spells. However, the guy is confused by the fact that the book does not say a word about where and how to buy or sell such a plate. The hero starts the car, hoping to find another similar bookstore nearby. During his trip, the guy managed to meet many creatures, even fairies. The guy remembers Shahei from the fitness center and hopes that the man is okay after the incident at the club. Walking down the street, Callum realizes that a lot of time has passed since then, and he still hasn't found the reason for that attack. However, he immediately justifies this by saying that it is unknown what he will find there. Suddenly, the hero finds a bookstore, inside of which stands an unknown girl with a very strong aura. Also sitting not far from the girl is an elderly couple, also magicians. The hero realizes to himself that no one present knows that there is a criminal magician among them. The main character notices a suspicious look from a woman sitting nearby and begins to get nervous. However, the woman waves at the guy and Wells realizes that she is most likely just being friendly. Turning around to look at the unknown girl, the hero sees that she is leafing through some book and reciting its text. Callum approaches the girl and says that no matter who the book is written for, half of it is probably nonsense. The girl laughs and replies that she spent the whole day in vain trying to understand what was written there. The protagonist offers his help, as he himself is looking for books for aspiring magicians. The girl admits that she is trying to avoid getting a mentor since she does not like the archmage who is trying to train her. Callum then asks how the girl wants to avoid getting a teacher, and she replies that she needs to do a personal project. The girl explains the details of the task, and the main character introduces himself as a professor. The girl also introduces herself as Gail Har and extends her hand to the young man. Callum invites the girl to study together, and the girl replies that she has a lot of free time. After learning what the girl needs to study, Wells says that it is quite a large amount of information. Callum asks the girl about attack spells because if the girl aims, she can still carry out attacks. Gale objects, saying that healing only helps, not harms, but Callum replies that it all depends on the application of magic. The girl admits that her parents sent her to the best academy for magicians, and therefore she does not have a human medical education. Then the main character writes some information on a piece of paper and hands it to the girl, suggesting that she study the information in the field of medicine at her leisure. Callum suggests that Gail pick one thing she can improve, and then her other skills will improve as well. After a while, Wells suggests ending the lesson, saying that's enough for today. Gail sincerely thanks the guy and asks if they can meet again next week. The next day, sitting in the car, Wells notes that he is indeed lucky and will be able to study magic with a novice magician. The protagonist visits the bookstore again and buys new books, seeing a werewolf woman at the checkout. Suddenly, the saleswoman asks if the guy found everything he was looking for. Callum becomes wary, and the woman says that there is another shelf behind her that might be of interest to the guy. As he leaves the store, Callum is tense that the woman knows something and he needs to get out of this place. Looking into the bag of books, the protagonist discovers something that the saleswoman put in there. Inside is Chester's phone number, asking him to call. At this moment, the alpha himself is next to the hacker Lucy, and the girl says that it's good that they contacted her right away. Lucy says she found the protagonist through the cameras and continues to track his movements. The hacker says the werewolves sent by the alpha did a lot of dirty work, but the girl was able to plot an approximate route where the main character might stop. The last place the guy was seen was a bookstore owned by a werewolf, and the wolves sent by Chester were heading there. Alpha asks to tell his charges not to have any contact with Callum and to let the guy come to them himself. In the evening, the protagonist stands in front of a telephone booth, wondering whether he should call the alpha. Still, Callum makes up his mind, telling himself that thanks to Chester, he will be able to decide what to do next. Alpha picks up the phone and greets the protagonist, introducing himself. The protagonist admits that he is not a mercenary, to which Chester says that he doesn't even know who the guy is. Alpha adds that despite this, he knows what the protagonist is capable of, and in exchange, can offer a substantial reward. For example, data on the GMR. Callum knows that money is not a problem for him, but it would be very useful to learn some useful things about the agents. Chester adds that he has connections with one of the experts in the field of magic and can arrange a meeting with him. In exchange, Callum must clear out 4 cities infested with vampires that are influencing werewolves and reducing the alpha's influence. The guy isn't sure if he'll be able to pull off such a trick, since last time he was most likely just lucky. Before making a deal, the guy asks Chester how he found him. Alpha says he sent his wolves out to search, but the boys' trips to bookstores made the search easier. Chester also adds that his people left a folder with information about vampires in a nearby trash can. Sometime later, the protagonist sits in a car and reads the information provided by the alpha. Having studied the map, the guy realizes that he won't be able to complete this job quickly, since some cities are located at a considerable distance. Therefore, the hero decides to start training on teleporting his body over distances. Using this, Callum surrounds himself with magic and hopes the plan will work. For a moment, the hero manages to transport himself, but he immediately loses his balance and falls. He will definitely need this in the future, but now he needs to find something that will help with stabilization. Meanwhile, in Vinuth, GMR agents continue to search for the main character. Using magic, Ray detects something ahead and invites his partner to check it out. Moving forward, both discover a hidden car that is completely empty. Ray encourages Felicia, saying that they are getting closer to solving the mystery. When the boy goes on reconnaissance, he uses his magic to increase the speed of his motorcycle. So, once the transport issue is resolved, he can calmly inspect the vampire nests. Alpha Chester gave the guy the contacts of all the local alphas, but it would be wiser for Wells to avoid contact. According to the information given to the guy, one of the vampire nests is located not far from the hero. Using his energy, Callum discovers a movie theater with 9 vampires inside. There is also one Earth Mage among the enemies, and there are many magic shields in the building. Callum realizes that if he doesn't go inside, he can easily bypass the defenses. The only problem is the Mage, because his magical shell looks secure. For a moment, Callum considers whether he should refuse Chester's offer, as the job looks difficult. Using his senses again, Wells discovers another vampire and is horrified to realize that he still hasn't figured out the true speed of vampires. The current enemies have a little unconscious girl as a hostage. Angry, the guy still decides to help and writes to Chester about it. Immediately after the reconnaissance, the protagonist hurries to meet Gale at the bookstore. During class, the girl hands the guy a telekinesis plate, and the main character praises her. Gale thanks Callum for bringing her the study materials. The girl takes the artifact back and uses her magic on it. Gale is pleased that she is able to influence the plate. When the experiment is successful, the girl throws herself into the protagonist's arms and thanks him for his help. Callum is happy for the girl and says that the lesson is over and sets up a meeting for next week. As he makes his way to a new location, Callum ponders how he can defeat the vampires. The most important weapon is thermite, which is usually used for welding rails. When ignited, it reaches a high temperature and is thus capable of melting vampires instantly. Having found the necessary ingredients, the protagonist is going to prepare a dangerous mixture for his mission. He pours all the contents into soda cans, creating homemade anti-vampire grenades. Having made a decent supply of such weapons, Callum decides to place them in hiding places in order to move faster and not have to carry so many things with him. Also, not far from himself, the main character discovers a stone, which he also intends to use. Sometime later, in a movie theater occupied by vampires, two of them are watching a movie. One of them asks who should go hunting and when. However, before the partner can respond, a soda can is dropped from the portal onto the creatures. The contents of the jar cause an explosion, and the vampires are burned alive. Other vampires come to the noise, not understanding why the fire alarm has suddenly gone off. Another pair of enemies are also killed by an explosion from a can that appears from the portal. Callum, who is leading the attack, feels that everything is going smoothly and has no intention of stopping just yet. Sometime later, the magician reacts to the noise, when almost all the vampires are already dead. Leaving his office, the magician discovers that all his observers are dead and the building is on fire. Callum senses a strong defense around the mage from a distance and realizes that his attacks might not penetrate it. Then the guy picks up the stone he found earlier, convincing himself that in front of him is, after all, a living creature. Even if it is a magician, his reaction is human, so Wells moves the stone closer to the portal. By raising the stone to a great height, Callum plans to place it directly into the portal and then release it. The boulder falls on the mage, catching him off guard and killing him instantly. Finally, Callum uses his senses one last time to make sure there are no survivors. An hour later, the main character arrives at the cinema to make sure that there are no more vampires nearby. Chester, who is with Lucy, asks the girl if there is any reaction from the vampires to the incident. The girl reports that there is nothing yet, and Callum is doing his job cleanly. The alpha gets messages from the guy about clearing out a few more nests, and the werewolf wonders how the guy manages to do it so quickly. Arriving at the next point, the protagonist uses his senses to determine the number of vampires and finds another mage. There are two people locked in a room, a guy and a girl, handcuffed. Now the main character's task is to get the innocent people out without the fire touching them. Callum realizes that if he pulls them out and takes them with him, he will reveal his identity, which he doesn't want to do. Remembering the guy and the girl, the hero realizes that he can no longer leave them. Therefore, at any cost, the young man decides to destroy the nest of vampires. He needs to act quickly. First, he needs to find the weak spots in the nest. In his strategy, the hero needs to destroy the places where there are most vampires. Having calculated everything carefully, Callum prepares 6 jars of thermite, which should be enough for the cleanup. The main character lights all the prepared bombs at once and teleports them. A young man and woman, prisoners, hear noise and explosions and become frightened. The guy tries to break the bars to get him and the girl out, but he can't. Then, a portal opens behind their backs and the main character emerges from it. Callum tells the hostages to stand up so he can carry them. The protagonist frees the hostages from their handcuffs and adds that he will get them out. Finally, Wells carries the boy and girl to a safe place and is about to leave. A guy and a girl try to find out who Wells is, but the hero refuses to answer and leaves. Having passed into the safe zone through the teleporter, the protagonist takes off his hood and mentally pities the victims. Alpha writes to the protagonist that the vampires are leaving the remaining points so the hunt can be stopped. Now the main character can breathe a sigh of relief because it's all finally over. For a second, the guy remembers the guy and girl he saved and is glad that he was able to help them. Some time ago, Chester was in Lucy's office arguing that it was impossible to clear the points so quickly. There is another person sitting next to the alpha, Jasper, who assumes that the guy uses GMR teleports, or fairy magic. Lucy says the guy hardly uses his phone, so she was unable to track his activities. Chester wonders what would happen if he could transport his people at that speed over different distances. Alpha says that perhaps the information from Jasper will not be enough for the protagonist. Lucy enters the conversation and says that Callum is unlikely to have a good hacker under his command. Chester says that if he were Lucy, he would be careful because of her relationship with GMR. The girl objects, saying that the guilds don't care about people like Lucy. Suddenly, during the conversation, Chester's phone rings. It's Antoine, the head of the vampires, demanding that he withdraw his powers from the vampires. Alpha explains that none of his werewolves have ever been seen near vampire nests. Antoine gets angry and says that he is taking his charges away from werewolf territory. Chester is happy about this news. He does not add any comments. The vampire objects, saying that he will get to the bottom of the truth and find out who hired the werewolf. Meanwhile, GMR agents examine a new crime scene, and Felicia asks if the same person could have done it. Ray says the method used was different, but otherwise, the principle remained the same. A moment later, the agent is brought a bearing that points to Callum's involvement. The man asks one of the researchers to step aside to talk to Felicia. The girl says she is tormented by suspicions that the destruction of the first nest was spontaneous. Felicia shows the evidence bag to her colleague and says that in the first case, someone close to him may have been stolen, so he went for revenge. Ray understands what the girl is getting at and says that in the second case, it looks more like a planned ambush. Felicia says the agents should talk to Chester since all the incidents took place on his territory. Ray adds that perhaps even the fairies have the information they need. Sometime later, the agents arrive at Alpha Chester. After asking the werewolf if he knows why the agents approached him, the Alpha expresses regret about what happened to the vampires. The werewolf adds that although he had skirmishes with vampires in the past, the pack has nothing to do with the massacre now. Ray smiles and says that in that case, Chester will be against answering a number of questions from the agents. Suddenly, the werewolf's phone rings, and the man takes a break to pick it up and tells the caller that he is busy. Sometime later, the man returns to the agents and asks where they left off. Meanwhile, the main character stands near the lockers and sorts through his things. Callum has divided the loot from the vampire nests into different locations, each of which can be reached via teleportation. Sometime later, the Alpha calls the protagonist back and says that the guy called him exactly at the moment when Chester had GMR agents. The werewolf adds that he thinks the guy did an excellent job. Wells asks if it is true that the werewolf did not give information about him to the guild agents. Chester confirms this and adds that the agents were, of course, upset that the werewolf didn't know anything. However, the man adds that, be that as it may, the guy needs to be careful because if he is spotted, the werewolf will not be able to help. Chester then moves on to the issue of payment and introduces the protagonist to Jasper, the magical expert they had previously spoken about. The werewolf also introduces Lucy, an IT specialist, to the guy. Callum smiles and asks that, in that case, the conversation should not be listened to. Lucy snatches the phone from Allah and says that she is amazed by the main character's abilities, so she wants to help him. After some thought, the protagonist finally agrees to help Lucy, as her skills could come in handy. Jasper immediately takes the phone from the girl and tells the protagonist that he just scanned several grimoires. The man adds that the hacker will send Callum all the necessary files and Jasper's contact information. Callum sincerely thanks the man and leads him out of the room where he had been talking before. Finally, Chester picks up the phone and warns the protagonist that he needs to be careful with the vampire Antoine. Later in the evening, the protagonist sorts through the documents sent by Jasper and mentally thanks the magician for the valuable papers. However, there isn't much information about spatial magic in the books, which means Jasper doesn't know much about it either. Sometime later, the main character calls Lucy, and the girl is surprised that the guy decided to contact so soon. Callum says he has a job for the girl, but first he wants to know how much it will cost him. The hacker offers to send the guy a price list, but adds that the price depends on how interesting the activity is. Lucy says that ordinary people in the supernatural world are given boring jobs, and Callum is surprised that the girl is an ordinary person. The hacker admits that her parents were magicians, but she was unlucky. While the guy is reading the price list, the girl says that her job is such that either Chester protects her or she's done for. Callum wonders if Chester is really that strong and influential since he needed his help so much. Lucy explains that Chester is a werewolf of practically royal blood, and by and large, nothing will happen to him. The hacker adds that probably only archmages and the head of vampires can stand on equal terms with the werewolf. Callum hears about the head of the vampires and says that it looks like Antoine is really someone important. After thinking for a bit, the guy asks Lucy to find him the couple he saved in one of the vampire nests. The girl quickly fulfills the request and says that, unfortunately, the couple was found by the Magic Regulation Guild. While the guy is packing his things, the girl asks how he is going to pay for the work. Callum offers to leave the ingot in the stash as a prepayment. Lucy is genuinely happy and thanks her boss. The next day, Callum meets up with Gale again and helps her train. When the girl succeeds in using magic on the plate, Wells suggests ending the lesson, as the girl tried very hard. Suddenly, the girl asks where the main character found such a spell, because she herself, Uli, could handle light spells for a long time. Callum begins to justify himself, saying that it was a friend of his who recommended literature to him. Gale asks him to thank his friend on her behalf because now her telekinesis trick works amazingly. When the protagonist asks about healing, the girl says that she read everything that Wells advised her to do. However, the girl doesn't realize that the guy doesn't understand what she's talking about, and Callum feels the difference in his magical training. Even though the main character started learning magic later than everyone else, it's still annoying. Gale grasps new information very quickly, and it is because of this that the boy sees his difference from a trained magician. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a meeting of the heads of the creatures begins, where Chester is unhappy that the one for whom the meeting is being held at night has not yet arrived. The head of the magicians calms his colleague and says that the vampire should arrive soon. Finally, the door opens and Antoine joins his colleagues. Chester greets the vampire with irritation, saying that he has finally appeared. Antoine gets angry at the werewolf and tells him he should hold his tongue, and both leaders are upset with each other. The Fey leader, Raveb, tells the vampire and werewolf to stop and suggests they begin a meeting. Archmage Jonry, the leader of the GMR, declares the meeting open. Meanwhile, the protagonist comes back to Vinoth. First, Callum checks his house to make sure it's okay and hasn't been cordoned off by the guild. The guy thinks to himself that it is Langley's fault that they did not allow the GMR to cordon off the house, hoping that the guy might return. Near the house, the protagonist opens 2 bags of money and discovers that they are untouched. Callum plans to take as much gold as he can carry. Having moved the necessary things, the guy realizes that now the most reasonable thing would be to simply leave. You just need to drive through the city without saying hello to anyone, at full speed. However, the hero simply cannot leave and approaches the cafe where the Langleys work. Using his intuition, the protagonist discovers the whole family gathered in a cafe. Inside, Jessica talks to Clara and asks her sister to bring steaks. The sheriff asks Jessica about Clara's condition after the kidnapping. The girl admits that most likely due to the vampire's spell, she, Clara, does not remember anything. Suddenly, Jessica smells a familiar scent and goes outside, seeing a motorcycle driving away from the cafe. The protagonist walks away, realizing that he almost got caught. The guy remembers Duvala and realizes that if he is near Langley, he has a better chance of being caught by the GMR. While the protagonist is returning home, Lucy calls him and asks if he would like to know where the GMR teleportation circles are. The hacker says it's not hard, and she's surprised Callum doesn't know this yet, since they thought he was using them. The guy denies this, saying that the assumption is good, but wrong. The hacker sends the guy a list of public teleports and adds that important families have their own private portals. After receiving the list, the guy is amazed that one of the teleporters is in a mattress store and becomes convinced that magic surrounds people everywhere. Later, the hero analyzes his further plan of action and realizes that now it is more important to train his teleportation skill. Callum uses his senses to examine the portal in the shop and realizes he needs to get closer to understand how the guild creates teleporters. Remembering his lessons with Gale, Wells realizes that all magic lies in carving something onto some kind of plate. Having constructed a primitive sketch of such a plate, the guy opens a portal and passes into it. Meanwhile, the leaders' meeting continues, and Antoine reveals that someone is working for the werewolves against the vampires. Chester protests and says that he will not tolerate such reckless accusations against the pack. Antoine asks the Archmage to publicly denounce the Alpha as he is not making any contribution to the discussion. The Fae leader objects, saying that the vampire is being reckless and blaming the werewolf for no reason. The Archmage concludes that the guild is investigating incidents in the vampire nests, but all suspicions against the werewolves have been removed. Janri also says that all leaders should be on guard as the criminal poses a danger to everyone. Antoine says that if werewolves aren't involved in what's happening, then the guild must have some leads. The Archmage takes out the bearing that Callum used and shows it to all his colleagues. Meanwhile, the main character arrives at another point with a teleport, a bookstore, where he studies with Gale. The guy realizes that he can use a special program and create his own spell for movement. However, even if he does something, it is not a fact that it will work. At that moment, he senses the student approaching through the portal. The hero guesses that the mark on the mage's hands is most likely used for movement, which opens access to teleportation. The guy is furious that he can't just walk up to the teleporter and take a good look at everything. Gale approaches the bookshop clerk asking where Callum is, but the hero is not there yet. Wells immediately calls the girl, and Gale admits that she thought the guy had forgotten about her. When they both sit down at the table, the girl says that this time she would like to learn more about movement magic. Callum says it's a tricky topic, especially considering healing magic has nothing to do with movement. Gale whines that everything would be easier if she were an elemental mage, then the requirements would be less. Callum remembers being in Gale's shoes and how he felt the same way. Suddenly, the girl says that since Callum is a space mage, he could teach her a couple of spells. The guy was caught off guard because he wouldn't be able to show Gale what she asked him to do. Still, the main character moves the chair nearby and demonstrates his skills. Gale is delighted and Wells begins to justify himself, saying that because he is tired, he cannot demonstrate anything else. The girl gets up from her seat and asks if she can learn to do the same. An hour later, Callum shows the girl the books from which he learned magic. Suddenly, the guy's phone starts ringing. It's Lucy and the hero is surprised. Callum leaves while he talks to the hacker and asks how things are going. The girl says she has some news about the rescued couple. Lucy explains that the GMR has a clear set of rules that govern its actions against ordinary people. Based on all this, the victims will be handed back to the vampires, which outrages the protagonist. Lucy understands that this is a stupid law, but it is more important for the guild to follow all the rules. The guy demands that the girl tell him the names of agents, vampires, and so on. Lucy stops Callum and says that she understands what he is getting at, but the hero interrupts her and asks for names. Later, the protagonist appears in front of the guild's main building in Kansas. Earlier, during a conversation with the hacker, the protagonist goes outside, saying that he can't just leave everything there. Callum is angry with himself for leaving those people to their fate and not taking them somewhere else. Lucy says she admires the guy and his actions, and she also thinks that GMR is a bunch of scum. Callum doesn't intend to do anything now, but still asks the hacker for names so he can prepare in advance. The girl promises that she will get everything, but asks the guy not to tell. Wells understands that until he improves his magical abilities, he will not be able to take over the GMR office. The next day, Callum calls Jasper, and the mage doesn't understand why the hero is so interested in young wizards. Callum explains that he is simply curious and wonders what could have prevented the child from using magic as a child. Jasper says he doesn't know because he's not a doctor, but he suspects it could be due to a lack of mana. Wells concludes that if a child did not grow up among magicians, then he could not use his powers either. Jasper says he's never seen a case like this, but it's likely true. The protagonist understands to himself that this makes sense because the first time he was able to use magic was at a late age, next to Shahei. Jasper distracts the guy from his thoughts and asks why Callum is suddenly asking such questions, asking if the hero really has a secret child. Wells says there is nothing like that and thanks the magician for his help. Sometime later, the hero calls the hacker and again asks about her family, and the girl reminds that everyone in her family was a magician. Lucy changes the subject and asks about the protagonist's family. Callum says that Jasper asked him this question before, and it all sounds like Chester wants to know more information about the main character. Lucy says it's just curiosity because the hero is too mysterious. The girl asks about the young man's personal life, to which Callum replies that perhaps she will find out something later. The girl replies that Wells made her tremble with anticipation. Sometime later, the protagonist shows up for class with Gale, and the girl says that she is tired of studying. The boy apologizes to the student for his sudden disappearance last time. Gale says everything is fine and hopes the hero is doing well. Gale admits that Callum is already wasting his time on her, but Wells reassures her that everything is fine. The protagonist admits that he was looking for new ways of teleportation and shares that he wants to create something more compact. The girl says that her father apparently uses a home bond device, which she can show to the guy. He replies that he would be happy to take a look at the device, saying that he would like to test some theories with a friend. Gale focuses on theories and asks if the guy's friend is a spatial mage. The girl leans towards the protagonist and says that the guild is especially careful about spatial mages. Gale says that if the rumors are to be believed, then Archmage Duvala is keeping a close eye on all of this. Leaving the protagonist at the end of class, Gale hopes that the boy will not have any problems with GMR. However, the girl reassures herself that the guy is a smart professor and he knows what he is doing. Using a teleporter, Gale is transported to a new location where a girl meets her and asks if Gale is returning home. As the girl takes Gale to the private portal, she says that the GMR has been very tense in recent days. Returning home, the young sorceress is met by the butler, who asks how Gale's classes went. The girl shares her impressions of the classes and says that she cannot understand why her family places such demands on her. The butler encourages the girl, saying that she is the future of the family, so such demands are not surprising. Gale says she can't wait for this to be over. After some time, Gale goes to see her father. The man says that her girlfriend, an archmage, might drop by to visit in the evening because of the vampire situation. Gale sits down next to her father and asks for a favor, which piques the man's interest. The girl reminds her about the home bond and asks if she can bring the device to the study group next week. Father says that this is a rather expensive thing, which is given out personally by Archmage Duvala. Gale says he promises to use it carefully, adding that the enchantment will be interesting to explore. Eventually, the father agrees, and the family begins to eat dinner. A week later, Gale meets with the protagonist and says that he can only bring the home bond for a few hours. Callum says that this is quite sufficient and asks to examine the device. The girl hands over the plate and says that it can only be activated with the help of her father's mark. Callum examines the device and the special ring that comes with it. The guy describes the exact principle of how Homebond works, which surprises Gale. The guy actually sees all the encrypted marks on the ring using his intuition, but he won't tell Gale about it. The guy understands to himself that if he remembers everything properly, he will be able to make such a device himself. Finally, Callum breaks out of his thoughts and hands the Homebond back to the girl, thanking her for bringing it. Meanwhile, the GMR agents arrived at the bar and asked the werewolf if he had seen Wells, to which he replied that something unusual always happens in the bar. Having received no useful information, Ray thanks the wolf for his help and leaves. Felicia notes with regret that they were unable to extract any information at all. The girl is irritated that one person can hide from the entire magical world. She adds that the trail is fading every day, and at this rate, Callum could be lost entirely. Ray says it depends on how you look at the situation. On the one hand, the guy really could lie low for life. However, experience suggests that criminals rarely rest on their laurels, and he will certainly take another step. Felicia reminds that if the first attack was committed for personal reasons, then the perpetrator must have weak points. Ray agrees that the guy may have some attachments. Meanwhile, the protagonist made a ring with a laser engraving copied from Home Bond. All that remains for the main character is to charge the item with his energy, and then it will work. Having filled the decoration with magic, the guy teleports to the bathroom and hits himself painfully. As he packs, Callum realizes there's more to spatial magic than the GMRs are letting on. The Archmage is careful to keep the space mages on a short leash, for only she knows what such magic is capable of. Because of this, the guy realizes that he is in even greater danger than he was before. Sometime later, the protagonist meets with Gale again, and she is going to demonstrate her skills. The girl creates her first shield, which, although not reliable, should be enough to pass the test. Callum encourages the girl, saying that he believes in her. When the girl successfully performs the spell, Wells cautiously remarks that it looks like their lessons have come to an end. Gale asks the teacher to meet her next week so she can tell him how the test went. Suddenly, the girl notices a bruise on the main character's arm, which Callum received after falling into the bathtub. Geo offers to cure the bruise with his magic, but the hero says he's fine. However, the girl helps Callum out of gratitude for all the lessons he has given her. Looking at the hand, the guy is amazed by this ability and praises the student. Gale says goodbye to the protagonist and says that she needs to sign up for the exam. Finally, Callum grabs the girl's hand and says that the girl cannot allow others to put her down. The next day, Gale takes the exam and the examiner suggests starting it in order. Since the girl has no problems with healing, this point is skipped, and Gale demonstrates the skills of light, movement, and shield. The examiner praises the girl and suggests moving on to attack spells. Concentrating, the girl destroys the mannequin standing in front of her. The examiner asks how she did it, and Gale explains that she used healing in reverse. She created blood clotting. The examiner looks strange, and the girl asks what's wrong, and that should be enough. The man says he needs to check something and is leaving for a while. 4 hours later, Gale is still waiting for the examiner, worried. Then the GMR agents come to the girl and greet Gale. The girl is worried about failing the test, but Ray replies that he is not responsible for it, but he is interested in learning about that very attack. Gale begins to explain that the original idea for this attack was not hers, but someone else's, and Ray asks if she can tell him his name. Gale introduces the protagonist as Professor Brown and asks if there is any problem, to which Ray asks her to tell him more about the man. Sometime later, the protagonist calls Lucy and asks her about the GMR, to which the hacker replies that the agents still cannot identify the killer. The girl says that many vampires decided to go into hiding because of the main character's actions. Callum replies that it is much better for him this way because he did not want to draw unnecessary attention to himself. Suddenly, the guy asks Lucy what she knows about Gale's family, and Lucy tensely asks why the guy needs it. Wells says he met a girl from this family and helped her. Lucy does some research on the girl and finds something fishy. Her family is one of the most dangerous and influential, and Archmage Har personally defined combat magic. However, Gale is a healer, which means there was incest in the family. Callum says it might be some kind of coincidence. Lucy doubts it and says that perhaps it was a political alliance, since such influential families cling to their pure blood. Apparently, the Gale family wanted to create a new talent. Lucy concludes that this family is definitely not the kind of people the protagonist should get involved with. Callum thanks the girl for the warning and information. Wells realizes to himself that things have become even more dangerous, and perhaps he should skip the meeting with Gale. However, a sudden disappearance will look suspicious to the girl. Sometime later, GMR agents surround the bookstore where Callum and Gale are scheduled to meet. Felicia says that the guild is most likely overdoing it, and it's surprising that it takes so much effort to catch one person. Ray replies that when the Archmage heard about the operation and heard that his granddaughter had been manipulated, he insisted on joining the capture himself. The agent says he was unable to dissuade the man. Felicia offers her partner binoculars, but Ray refuses, saying that it is easier for him to observe using air magic. Specialists begin tracking the main character and see that he has teleported, which surprises Ray, and after all, the guy was considered a gravity mage. The man commands and tells them to grab the main character before he disappears again. Callum is hit by bullets and is shocked that he was caught off guard. The guy gets hit by a chain that blocks the ability to use magic. The hero doesn't have time to do anything. He is tied up with a special rope. Felicia and Ray go down to the military around Wells and say that they will handle the rest of the situation. Archmage Har immediately appears and demands that Callum be handed over to him. However, Ray convinces the man that the guild was looking for Wells because of the investigation. The magician promises to give the guy to Haru after they receive all the necessary information. The Archmage turns and leaves, demanding to be kept informed of what is happening. Ray tells the military to search the captured hero to find something that indicates the guy is connected to the vampire killings. Callum is knocked out and a ball bearing is found on him, after which Ray announces that the killer has been found. Sometime later, the protagonist comes to his senses in an interrogation room. Callum is angry that he didn't teleport away immediately when he sensed the other mage. Agents Ray and Felicia come to the young man and greet him. Ray calls the main character's real name, and the guy understands that the agents now know everything about him. The agent, sitting down at the table, says that it was obvious because one half of the GMI was looking for the escaped Sarah, the other, the killer. Oi says it's surprising they didn't suspect the connection sooner. Now the man says that his colleague wants to ask a few questions. Felicia uses her charms and asks the guy if he was an accomplice in the destruction of the vampire nest in Venuth. The guy doesn't answer the question, so Ray says that bearings were found on the guy. Felicia says that they are more interested in the reason. The guy is not from here. He has no reason to break the laws of the GMR in this place. Callum says that vampires killed people, but the agents say that it doesn't matter now, which upsets the guy. Then Felicia asks who the hero works for, but Wells replies that he works for himself. Ray lights a cigarette and says that under different circumstances, he and Callum would definitely have gotten along. However, now the guy is a criminal magician, and the agent's task is to stop him. Felicia says that the hero faces a harsh sentence, but the guy asks under what pretext he was arrested. Ray says the guy is in custody because he managed to anger a lot of people. Now, the agents are accusing the guy of teaching Gale the spell and want to know where he learned about it, and in general, whether he had a strong influence on the girl's reputation. The protagonist says that everything is obvious to him, but the agents don't understand what he means. Callum explains that Gale's attacks are based on basic biochemistry. Ray says that in this way, the guy is corrupting magic, mixing it with the ordinary human understanding of things. Wells says he wasn't aware this was a problem and asks what problems Gale might have. The agent says that due to the guy's influence, the girl could become a criminal magician. Ray says that in this way, the hero has driven the girl to cruelty, but Callum gets angry, saying that it is a requirement of the GMR to know offensive spells. He gets a shock in response to the guy's aggression. Felicia asks if the hero tried to recruit Gale for his organization. The girl says that if the guy wants to help Gale, then he needs to be more open, to which the guy replies that the agents are using the girl to get him to talk. The protagonist smiles and says that as soon as the guild is threatened, the secret police immediately intervene. The guy immediately adds that after this conversation, none of the agents will see him. Callum asks if the agents have any idea why he's even talking to them. Ray understands what the hero is getting at, since it is impossible to open a portal in the room. Callum replies that he doesn't need the portal, and he was thinking about how he would act if he found himself in a similar situation. Wells hints that he has placed Tool's home bond where agents cannot retrieve it. The main character disappears, and the agents do not have time to catch him. Felicia doesn't understand where he could have disappeared to. Ray declares a level 4 alert and requests all available agents be made available to him. Felicia doesn't understand how he could disappear like that, since the hero was being tested for home bonds. The agents think about Duval and that someone else could have made the device, but Ray says that is impossible. Felicia suggests tracking the hero by blood, but Ray says that this is also useless and the guy has already disappeared. Duval is informed about the disappearance of the main character, and she is furious that someone is most likely helping the guy. Jean says they can investigate, but there are more serious problems. After reading the main article about Callum, Duvala asks again if he seduced Gale. Jean confirms this, but doesn't understand why everyone is so worried about it. Duvala explains that healing is one of the few abilities that can bypass normal mana protection if used aggressively. If Gale delves too deeply into this knowledge, she will become a dangerous opponent. Jean asks if the Archmage can provide any knowledge that will help the guild in its investigation. Luvala says that spatial mages are not dangerous, although there are some techniques that can be difficult. The Archmage says that a spatial mage is born once every 30-40 and she needs every one of them. Sometime later, Callum is free and glad that he thought to hide all his personal information around the state. Remembering the GMR, the guy realizes that the agents think he works for some organization, which might confuse them. After contacting Lucy, the girl says that she was afraid that she would never hear the hero's voice again. Callum asks how he is doing and how bad it is. Lucy says that everything is actually quiet because no one will admit to anything. Callum is surprised that the hacker still wants to work with the protagonist. The guy says that now he just wanted to make sure that the girl was okay. Such a hero asks where he can find some magical equipment. Lucy says it's not an easy task since such things are regulated by the guild. She says that such things are done from their portals, and since the hero Ule is wanted, she can try. Callum admits he should have known it wouldn't be easy. Lucy informs the protagonist that Archmage Duvala is furious. After all, she is a spatial mage who controls everyone else. That same night, Callum sits in a tent in the woods and studies the materials sent by Lucy. The guy is close to the fairy territory and is wary because he has never interacted with fairies before and doesn't know what they are like. Fairies can do things that ordinary magicians cannot understand. Using his sense of smell, the protagonist detects movements away from the tent. He discovers a whole group of creatures on the hunt. Not far away in the forest, a young man and woman are running away from pursuit. The girl is already tired and can't run, but the guy encourages her. The guy understands that if they give up now, they will die like the others. The main character remembers his childhood many years ago. A boy was wilt on the playground, wondering how long bullies have been bullying children. However, the main character did not dare to help the offended boy. Wells's father approached him and asked why he stayed away. The boy replies that it was his turn to ride the slide, so he didn't help. The father is disappointed with his son's response and says that he thought he raised his son well. Callum asks why he had to say anything. Wells says it was another boy who pushed the poor guy, but for some reason, the father is angry with Callum. The father explains that the boy should help those who need it. After all, villains only win when good people stand aside. Returning to the present, the guy realizes that he needs to help those people. However, if he interferes with this now, the plane will catch the eye of the GMR. Immediately, the hero hears a terrible sound not far from his tent. A group of hunters say among themselves that the hunting time has almost come. The girl says that the people found have already escaped. Callum feels the creatures begin to move. The main character smiles and says that no matter who he deceives, he is a good person. As he leaves the tent, Callum says he's starting a fairy hunt. The hero uses his senses to pinpoint the exact location of creatures and follow them. Even though the boy doesn't know what skills the fairies have, he at least knows how many of them are out hunting. Wells takes 24 rounds of ammunition with him and reloads the pistol. Callum's goal is to find the humans before the creatures do and bring the victims to safety. Wells understands that people can easily survive the hunt. Meanwhile, the girl and the boy continue to run away, and the girl says that she can't run anymore. The guy helps her up and suggests they hide somewhere. Then the main character appears in front of Dad and says that he came to help. The guy asks who Callum is, to which Wells replies that he just wants to help them. The hero says there is no time to explain. He says that now they need to follow the instructions. Callum explains how to get to safety and warns the pair that they need to move quickly. The guy thinks that in principle, he could immediately teleport people to a safe place. However, they need to get off the path and lead the fairies out of this area, and Wells cannot go with them because he might be noticed. The couple say they will follow the young man's advice, and Callum says they will meet in a safe place. Having reached the right place, wat der berserfrieder anarito, forfitens verfitsa serenessa amberfrin, Imshorstashi medka contoid fimains unwisi main character elihasas. Before the guy can answer her, Callum transports them to another place. The main character helps the girl up and says that they are a kilometer away from the dangerous place. Callum asks the couple how they ended up in this situation and why they were being followed. The girl says that they don't know, and the creatures simply ordered the couple to hide from them. Wells is angered by these words because people were caught just for fun. The guy opens a portal and leaves to deal with the creatures. Meanwhile, monsters roam the forest, unaware of humans, and Callum discreetly takes pixies through portals. The girl says that people are stupid, and it is very easy and fun to deceive them. Suddenly, both hunters notice that the pixies are missing. Suddenly, a portal opens beneath the creatures, but one of the hunters' tree-like assistants doesn't manage to escape. The boy then tells the remaining assistants to hurry and report the attack to the monarchs. After this, one of the tree creatures is killed by a boulder that appeared from the teleporter. The huntress begins to get angry that someone dared to attack them, but does not have time to finish. A portal appears in front of the girl, and a bullet hits her right in the head, killing her instantly. The second hunter sees this, and in a rage is about to use magic. He senses someone nearby, so the remaining wooden warrior takes aim with his bow at the killer. Callum notices the arrow flying towards him at the last moment, but manages to disappear into the portal. The protagonist tells himself that he needs to be careful and stay out of reach. Suddenly, an enemy appears behind the guy, who is about to attack. At the last moment, the hero jumps back and takes out a pistol. However, the enemy has already disappeared, and Callum does not see that he is trying to attack from behind. The creature throws the protagonist into the distance, and Wells does not understand how this happened. Finally, Callum uses his senses and detects an enemy nearby. Now, the boy notices the creature in the tree trunk, realizing that it can move in this way. Trying to shoot the enemy with a pistol, Wells sees that the creature is nimble. An idea comes to the guy's mind on how to defeat the enemy. At the moment when the enemy is about to attack the guy again, the hero activates magic. Using a group of teleports, the guy kills the creature. With that done, Callum opens a portal to leave. The protagonist takes the remaining hunter to the cave. In it, the hunter finds the corpses of the pixie that Callum took earlier. Sometime later, the protagonist meets with the rescued couple and says that it will be safer if everyone forgets about it. The girl replies that they understand this and will support the hero. Wells says he understands the event was traumatic for the couple, but they need to find the strength to cope. After saying goodbye to the couple, Callum calls Chester and says he's having trouble with a group of fairies. Chester ponders the boy's words as Wells describes those he encountered. The werewolf says that the protagonist needs to leave immediately since the fairies were of noble birth. Here Chester says that he could help the guy and offers to work for him. However, the hero refuses, saying that after the last skirmish with the GMR, he began to value freedom more. The werewolf replies that in that case, the guy needs to hide somewhere where supernatural creatures can't get to him. After finishing his conversation with the main character, Chester tells the hacker that he doesn't understand what the guy is thinking. The werewolf praises Callum for pulling off such a plan to escape from the GMR, and now the man wants to know more about the main character. Alpha approaches Lucy and asks if she has found any more information about Callum. Chester doesn't believe that magic awakened in the boy out of the blue, so he thinks that Wells has some influential relatives. The main character himself arrives at the airport and silently hopes that this is the right path. Flying as far as possible seems like a good idea, since the GMR were able to track the guy down, even in Venuta. For a second, the hero remembers Agent Sen and his words about the guild. According to the agent, all portals are carefully guarded and can only be entered under special circumstances or with an escort. So, if the protagonist can find a way to bypass the security, he will be safe for a while. However, to find the portal, you need to go to Europe. While exploring the airport, Callum realizes that the place is heavily guarded and that he won't be able to simply teleport onto the plane. Buying a ticket is also risky, as it can be tracked. Sometime later, the protagonist uses invisibility to walk in the crowd. The guy developed this trick together with Gale when they were training together. While Callum is wondering what to do next, he sees a man rob a woman and run away with her bag. Callum dismisses this, saying there is no time to focus on such issues. However, the guy then decides to help and trips the criminal so that he is caught and apprehended by security. A security guard runs up to the thief and puts handcuffs on him. The protagonist takes the pass from the guard while he is negotiating with the criminal. Unnoticed, Callum opens the door and walks inside. At the same time, in the forest where the main character had previously been, King Jis of the Fairy People is exploring the place where the battle took place. His assistant says that perhaps the Earth will remember what is happening and help. The king uses his magic and says that of course the Earth remembers everything. The creature sees everything that happened before, sees Callum, and the assistant asks what happened here. The king says that the man is unknown to him and the assistant mentions the GMR and says that magicians are their specialty. Jim says that no matter how much he hates the fairies who died here, he must protect his people. The king uses the wind and says that they will follow the killer. Both creatures arrive at the airport and find Callum missing. While the creatures are talking to each other, an airport employee comes out to them and says that they are not allowed to be here. The man says that this is a restricted area and that he is here illegally. Jim is outraged that someone dares to tell him where he is. The airport worker doesn't care where the creatures come from. He tells the trespassers to leave immediately. Then the king grabs the man's face and threatens him with death. Jis says that no one dares to talk to him like that and kills the airport worker. After this, Jis turns to his assistant and tells her to call his steed. They immediately leave. At this time, the main character enters the plane and goes to the restroom. Wells bandages his wounds after fighting forest creatures. The guy remembers Gale's ability to heal and wonders how the girl is doing now. Callum hopes that one day he will have the opportunity to make it up to her. Suddenly, the door to the restroom opens and a flight attendant enters, immediately apologizing for the sudden intrusion. Wells says everything is fine and changes clothes and leads back into the salon. A few hours later, the GMR agents meet King Jisa, who has arrived to see them. The girl from the guild greets the creature and asks what brings him here. Jis declares that one of the magicians attacked his people, and the girl guesses who it might be. Jis continues, saying that the guild must find the culprit and take responsibility for this. Sometime later, Agent Ray comes to Jisoo and greets him. The king shares that the criminal's magic was unusual, and Ray asks what exactly the creature saw. The king tells everything in order and video of the agent's smile, asking what's going on. Ray replies that he seems to know whose doing this is, since GMR met this person a little earlier. The man shows the king a photo of Callum and asks him to tell him in more detail where Jice spotted him. Sometime later, the protagonist arrives in Switzerland and sneaks into the portal to the dragon world. The guy guesses to himself that this is one of the most dangerous worlds. Callum hasn't been able to find much information about the creatures, but he understands that they are powerful. Using his intuition, the protagonist detects only one guard wearing headphones. Wells decides to distract him with simple means, not magic. Throwing a rock, Callum steals the guard's radio through the portal. By throwing the item further away from the table and the portal, the protagonist forces the guard to come closer to pick up the item. At the same time, Callum slips closer to the portal and goes inside. The main character finds himself in a new place with bright light. Looking around, the guy sees that the world of dragons is very beautiful. Wells also discovers that this is simply everywhere and feels completely different. Looking at the portal, the hero sees that it is different from Wells' teleports, but it is difficult to say what the difference is. Suddenly, the guy feels someone's presence around him. A huge red dragon appears in front of the main character, unfriendly towards the guy. However, the creature immediately softens, and the hero realizes that it is Shahei in front of him. Meanwhile, the GMR agents are having a snack in the car, and Ray reports that the guild is assembling a group to capture Callum. A detachment is assembled from the GMR, where the agents discuss among themselves how one magician can cause so many problems. One of the agents speaks to Sen, who is sitting next to him. The young man is still angry at Wells and says he wants revenge. At this moment, the protagonist and Shahei are talking to each other about GMR. Shahei says that he didn't think that Callum was a mage, and the hero agrees with his friend, saying that he doesn't fully believe it either. Shahei asks what brought the boy to his world, and he hopes that Wells was not following him. Callum replies that he thought the GMR wouldn't look for him in the dragon world. Shahei replies contentedly that this is forbidden, and anyway, no one wants to challenge dragons. After all, creatures can create and destroy matter, and if they acquire their true form, they become larger than continents. After making tea for his friend, Shahei says that the guy is very lucky that he met him. Wells asks why the dragon was attacked in the gym, to which Shahei replies that it was a long-standing personal conflict. When the hero asks if the dragon has returned, Shahei replies that he has a couple of avatars nearby, but Callum doesn't understand his friend. Then the dragon takes the form of a man and says that he has bodies, puppets, in which he can appear in the world of people. Callum shares that, even so, he still saw his friend's true form every time in the hall, to which Shahe says that most likely it is some rare ability the guy got from his father. At first, Wells doesn't understand, and Shahe explains that the boy was raised by non-biological parents. The dragon says that he never met the protagonist's biological father, but he was a magician. Callum admits that he suspected that something was wrong with his parents, but he was probably just afraid to ask. Then the guy goes to the dragon and asks him to tell him about his real parents. Shahe says that the boy's mother has always been problematic. When Callum was first born, she essentially left her son right away. At that time, the main character's upbringing was taken over by his maternal grandparents. Wells admits it must have been difficult for his grandparents to bring up the topic. Shahe puts his hand on his friend's shoulder and says that dragons have an unspoken rule not to interfere in the affairs of people. Shahe had tried to stay away from everything that was going on in Callum's family all this time. But even so, Wells' parents were good people. Sometime later, Shahe jokingly puts up with Callum's head and says that he can't stay here forever. Then Callum asks if there is a place where the hero could hide. Shahe thinks that the land of the fairies is a pleasant but unpredictable place, and the deep wilderness is also dangerous. The Nightlands are a good place with plenty of resources to prepare for the GMR confrontation. Wells thinks about the Nightlands after the dragon's words. Shahe sternly tells his friend that he is in danger and hits him in the chest. While they are chatting, half the magical world is chasing Callum, and the protagonist asks what he should do then. Shahe instantly takes on a new form, his real one, becoming a huge creature and telling the protagonist that he must be strong. Meanwhile, in Vinith, Ray comes to Langley and shows him an official request from the Department of Secret Investigation. The sheriff says he understands the agent, but he can't tell him anything new. Ray says that the sheriff is one of the few who saw the main character, and it is very strange that he does not know anything. Langley replies that the guy had a different name in town, and he doesn't understand what the agent wants to hear from him. Ray says the guild has evidence that the protagonist is in Europe. The sheriff replies, "You are a small city, and they don't know anything about Europe." Jessica comes out and gives the agent the coffee he ordered. Ray asks if the girl knew the main character. The sheriff becomes tense and reproaches the agents for pestering his daughter in vain. Ray apologizes, leaves the cup, and leaves. Sometime later, the agents are sitting in the car. Felicia says that she managed to extract information from Clara. The man objects that his partner used her powers against the girl, which could have consequences, but Felicia reassures her colleague. She says that the werewolf didn't understand anything, but the man says that such information cannot be ignored. Felicia says that the girl doesn't remember much, but she knows that she was kidnapped by a vampire and then teleported back by someone. Ray comes to the conclusion that the werewolves are hiding something, even though it was obvious. The man adds that they still haven't received any new information, so the investigation needs a new impetus, otherwise they will end up at a dead end. Meanwhile, the protagonist approaches the guarded portal to enter the Nightlands. Callum recalls that the Dragon World had a more powerful spell cast on it than the current portal. Watching from afar, the hero thinks that it would be best to teleport straight to the portal. However, the guy thought that it was too simple, that it couldn't be true. Meanwhile, a guard stands next to the portal, who momentarily notices that something is wrong with the portal, but then blames it on his imagination. In fact, it is the main character who quickly teleported straight into the portal and walked through it. The guy finds himself in the Nightlands and remembers that when he entered the portal, it was day, but now it is night. Callum goes to the window, looks out, and sees that this place is not as beautiful as other worlds. Exploring the city below using his senses, the protagonist sees that there are both vampires and ordinary mages in it. The protagonist thought that there would only be vampires here who closely interact with the guild, but things are different. Considering the hostility of some mages towards ordinary people, it is possible that some simply prefer to live in portal worlds. After analyzing the situation, the protagonist realizes that the Night Lands are the worst possible scenario for him and the most unsafe place. And all because in this world, there are two groups of creatures who wish death on the main character, did everything to catch him. The guy understands that staying here will be risky, but if his friend is right about the materials, then he needs to look around before leaving. Meanwhile, somewhere in the Night Lands, vampires are dealing with wolves. The man is unhappy that they are given dirty work and that they have to deal with animals. The woman agrees with her friend, but immediately asks if he feels anything strange. The vampire explains that she feels the presence of the magician nearby, but the man says that at such a time it is very strange. Then the woman asks what they should do, to which the vampire replies that nothing is needed because it is only the magician's problem if he gets lost in the forest. The woman objects and decides to contact the authorities, explaining that the magician may come from some noble family, and then problems may arise. The woman contacts the operator, explains the situation with the presence of the magician, and asks what the instructions will be. The man tells her that it's just a waste of time and that it's most likely just some airbender who decided to fly in the area. The operator immediately connects with the vampire and tells her to immediately leave the area and return to the base. The woman asks what's wrong, but the operator doesn't answer. He repeats to return to base immediately. Approaching the castle, the vampire scolds her friend for saying that it was just nonsense, to which the vampire begins to make excuses. The man asks what they will tell, and the vampiress replies that most likely they will be asked about what they felt. Both vampires enter the hall. An unknown man stands in front of them, and the vampire asks where their military leader is. The unknown person turns to the vampires and introduces himself as the magician Tyson from the Bureau of Secrecy. Both vampires are in shock and don't ask how they can help. The magician approaches the vampires and says that he heard that the vampires discovered a lone magician and asks them to tell him more about it. Then the woman says that she was lying down and catching his scent, to which the magician asks if they are sure that it was the magician, and the woman confirms this. Then the vampire asks what's going on and why the bureau agent is in the Nightlands. Tyson passes by, saying that they have reason to believe that there is an escaped mage in the Nightlands. When the vampire says that this man is most likely dangerous since he attracted the attention of the Bureau, and the vampire asks how dangerous the enemy is, the magician replies that they have to find out and that the Bureau currently considers it a top-level threat. After this, the agent leaves and asks the two vampires to convey the order to all their fellow intelligence officers. Meanwhile, the protagonist teleports to the forest lands, intending to find materials for himself. The guy remembers to himself that no literature had prepared him for these territories, and for him everything here is new and unknown. The Nightlands have a very unusual world layout, which Wells noticed at the very beginning, so he needs to be careful. Be that as it may, the main character understands that he needs to leave here as soon as possible. Having studied some information earlier about the materials that can be found in the lands, the guy learns that they are all located in the forest in unusual places. The protagonist has settled into a tent in the forest, which is why he periodically looks outside to make sure he is alone. However, at some point he discovers that not far from him, a certain creature is fighting a druid. The main character understands that this is his chance to find materials, so now Callum can follow the small creature, as it can lead him to the materials. The main character takes out a pistol and is going to quickly deal with the druid. However, before shooting, the guy realizes that the cartridges can be found by vampires, and then everything will become obvious and he will be exposed. Then the hero decides to act differently. He opens a portal in front of the druid's hand. The creature reaches its hand forward into the portal, its hand piercing its own body from another portal. After this, the main character calmly follows a small winged creature, which leads him to its nest, where valuable materials are located. Callum sees that there is a raw mordite below and hopes to retrieve it through the portals if he is careful. The protagonist uses his magic to get the valuable material. He carefully grabs it. After taking out several valuables, Wells sees tentacles emerging from the water. The guy understands that the tentacles are already calming down, but he has not yet gotten all the materials, which means it may be difficult. Then the protagonist uses the druid's body to distract the tentacles. He throws it into the water. The tentacle immediately covered the body, and the guy uses his magic. After this, the main character calmly takes the materials and puts them in his backpack. A few hours later, guild agents arrive at the place where the protagonist collected valuable materials and wonder who was able to activate this nest. One of the agents informs his superior that all the valuable metals that were in this nest were stolen. After thinking for a bit, the agents realize that the nest was most likely robbed by the same escaped magician. While the agents report everything to the bureau, the protagonist calmly teleports to safe territory, believing that he is finished for the day. Tayson receives information about the protagonist's location and orders the boy to be caught immediately at any cost. The very first thing the agent wants to do is cut off the main character's escape route and close the portal. The agents and his assistant go into the room where the portal is located, but discover that the culprit has already managed to get to him. The protagonist turns around and sees two people behind him, after which they quickly slip into the portal. The entire guild is on edge. Everyone is trying to catch the main character and is using all possible forces to track him. Formed squads are sent to various points to catch the guy. Some warriors hold him at gunpoint, awaiting orders. The main character barely escapes from pursuit, and I think to myself that he didn't think that the agents would be so nimble. Wells opens a portal to move forward 500 meters. The main character barely moves to a new place. He feels sick from the frequent use of portals, since he is not accustomed to this. A couple of commas come up to Callum and ask if he is okay. The young man does not understand people, to which the couple replies that they do not speak English. Looking around the surroundings, the main character realizes that he has moved to Paris. Meanwhile, Sen, on behalf of the guild, joins the pursuit, saying that it is his turn to catch the criminal. The guild agent locates the guy's approximate location in France, hoping that this time the protagonist won't be able to teleport as quickly. The agent uses wind and special technology to find traces of Wells. Sometime later, Sen finds the protagonist in the Comma Cafe and is about to attack him with fire. A few minutes ago, the main character was calmly in the restroom, coming to his senses, not understanding how this happened to him. Callum scolds himself for not preparing better and almost falling into the hands of the guild again. At the moment when the agent attacks the protagonist, Callum opens a portal in front of him so that the attack scene takes place there. The main character also manages to open a portal behind his back and immediately disappear into it. The cafe is almost completely destroyed, but Sen doesn't stop and continues to look for the guy. However, on the ground, the agent discovers a remaining bearing, which makes him angry, realizing that he has missed the criminal. Meanwhile, Wells is in the forest, resting after the chase. The boy looks at his hands, seeing that even though the shield blocked most of the spell, it was still powerful. Juice, the young man, says that he underestimated the agent, thinking that he was just a spoiled child. However, it turns out that the guild also underestimated the main character because he never makes the same mistake twice. The protagonist stands up and says that the guild will never be able to find him again. Later that evening, Sen comes to the agent from the bureau and hears that 18 people have died due to a careless spell that the agent used. The young man objects, saying that he was allowed to use the techniques at full power. A grown man comes down, grabs the agent, and yells at him for allowing people to die. Sen starts making excuses that there were no witnesses, but this doesn't reassure the agent from the bureau, he shouts, and says that others cleaned up everything after the guy. Sen replies that they were ordinary mortals, and he doesn't understand what the problem is. The man replies that there would be a lot of trouble if the promised world found out about the guild's existence. The man also says that they all work for a specific reason, and the young man, with his reckless behavior, put the entire operation at risk. The young agent apologized to his boss, but he said he didn't need an apology and wanted results. Sen replies that the protagonist still surprises them, because every time they find him, Wells manages to slip away. The boss thinks for a moment and says that the main character is not a simple magician, and apparently the test showed incorrect results. He adds that if the escaped mage is of the archmage level, then there is clearly some kind of mistake. Sen says that this is impossible because there have never been so many powerful spatial mages. The agent's boss closes the book and says that the protagonist's supporters must be immediately found and brought to justice. Finally, the man warns his protege that if a similar situation happens again, he will form the department from scratch. Meanwhile, the main character has a nightmare about what happened in Paris, and it seems to him that someone is calling him for help. He helps the girl up and asks who did this to her. The girl's face is disfigured and completely burned, and she points to Agent Sen not far from the protagonist. This quickly wakes the guy up. He is shaking all over, but quickly reassures himself that it is just a dream. Callum is flying on a plane. He understands that now he does not need to attract a lot of unnecessary attention. He also blames himself a little for the fact that people died because of the agent's spell. When the plane lands in Texas, the guy gets off the plane, but suddenly feels pain in his arm. Wells wonders if the spell on the home bond is wearing off, but he is nevertheless pleased that the device has worked for so long. Looking into his bag, the protagonist sees the materials he found in the Nightlands and realizes that they are starting to deteriorate. Sometime later, the guy finds a small shop where they can make any structure to order. He is met by a young, red-haired girl, and Callum asks if she can make a custom piece, to which the girl asks him to show her the materials. Along with the materials, the protagonist shows a sketch that he drew himself, and the girl says that it is a rather complex drawing, and asks where Callum got such knowledge. The guy says it's just his hobby, and the girl says she can generally make what the hero is suggesting. After examining the metals that Wells brought, the girl says that she has never seen anything like it before. She says that some tests need to be run to determine some indicators, and the order will be ready in a few days. While the order is being prepared, Callum decides to read some information and prepare new plans in case of a GMR. Wells is confident that Mordite will help him unlock some of his potential, and in the future, the boy will be able to create his own teleportation network. Suddenly, Lucy contacts the main character and is glad that the hero is unharmed. The girl says that she knows everything that happened to Wells and is amazed by his vitality. Callum hears the news about himself and laughs that the GMR are making him out to be a criminal in this way. Lucy replies that right now, the protagonist is the only one making the guild nervous. After all, the GMR had a clearly developed system of work, but then Wells suddenly appears and breaks this system. Another idea of the hacker is that the main character is simply a villain who can destroy the guild with one spell. Lucy explains that she actually has a lot of free time and asks how things are going with her boyfriend. Callum says he's more alert than ever now. Lucy says the guy could use some rest and suggests they run away to a resort somewhere in Mexico. Wells agrees with the girl's idea, which confuses the hacker. After the conversation, the girl scolds herself for such words because she should not attack clients. Sometime later, the protagonist trains to create threads from Vis. With a little effort, Wells manages to create a small thread and transform it into a ball. After this, the guy realizes that he was able to create a space that is larger on the inside than it appears on the outside. Of course, in terms of volume and scale, this is not something global and significant, like traveling through space, like Doctor Who. However, now the guy has endless opportunities, and if he tries hard enough, he won't need to rent lockers all over the state. After this, the hero remembers that it is time to go to the workshop and pick up his order. A girl appears from behind the table and greets the guy. Callum reminds him of his order, and the craftsman says that the alloy of materials turned out to be very unusual. At first, she thought it was a lead alloy, but the melting point was different, so she had to conduct a series of experiments. As a result, she managed to obtain almost 3 kilograms of thin wire, which can be put to use. The guy is amazed, and the girl replies that she even has some material left, and she made several copies according to the hero's drawing. Wells looks at his order and is amazed at the perfect work, thanks to the girl. The girl gets embarrassed, and then the main character asks how much he should pay for the order. Having paid a considerable sum, Callum takes the order and leaves the workshop in shock. On the street, the guy remembers that all these large expenses reminded him of a hacker he needs to call. Lucy, picking up the phone, stutters, which amuses the hero, who thought that he would stutter himself. The hero says that he is calling Lucy to ask her for help selling something. The guy is talking about a home bond, and the hacker says that the product is serious, and on the black market, such things can cost the buyer a pretty penny. Wells asks how much such things can be sold for, even if the price tag is in the millions. The question is who will buy it? The girl replies that there is a GMR that will detect that anyone who has a personal unregistered home bond faces a prison term. Callum then tells the hacker not to put herself in danger, but if she finds a buyer, she will receive a personal percentage. After this, they both say goodbye, and the guy tells the girl to take care of herself. At this time, John comes to Archmage Haru and tells the news about the main character. The man is angry and shouts that the guild is doing nothing to catch the criminal. The man continues to scold John, saying that all attempts have been unsuccessful and that it is a shame. The Archmage approaches Jean and says that he wants to entrust the mage with an important mission that requires maximum trust. Har says he believes Callum has an accomplice within the GMR who needs to be found. Archmage Duvala is interested in finding him, so they want to put Jean in charge of this task. Jacques asks again if the Archmage thinks there is a rat inside the guild, and Har confirms this. Sometime later, the protagonist contacts Lucy, asking about selling home bonds, to which the girl replies that there may be problems with this. However, there is still a buyer, an alpha, a good friend of Callum. The guy immediately guesses that they are talking about Chester and says that everything is turning out too convenient. The hacker replies that she could never understand what was on the alpha's mind. Besides, home bonds are complex devices that are made to order. Callum knows that if any questions arise, Chester will be able to cover it up with the teleportation devices that suddenly appeared in his possession. The guy realizes that he could use some money and tells Lucy that he will contact Chester. After finishing his conversation with the girl, the protagonist is going to adjust the home bond, as using it can cause mild nausea. Wells thinks about the abilities of werewolves and realizes that a regular ring for activation will not be enough. Wells sits down to fine-tune the device for Chester. The protagonist spent the entire night improving the home bond and finally prepared a device specifically for the alpha. The next day after this, Chester contacts Callum about the device. The protagonist asks the alpha if he has ever considered setting up his own teleportation network, not tied to the GMR. Chester replies that the price, apparently, is not small, but Chester is ready to pay for such a product. Wells says he's customized the device specifically for Chester, but it won't be as well equipped as the GMR home bonds. This guy warns the alpha that the device has no security features. Eventually, the two agree to buy the home bond, also deciding to give part of the money to Lucy for her help. Meanwhile, GMR agents Ray and Felicia arrive at headquarters in response to an urgent call. Inside, they are met by Jacques, who greets the agents and invites them to sit down. First, the man asks for the agents' full names, assuring them that he is aware of their abilities. Jacques then asks how long the agents have worked together, to which they both reply that it has been so long that they can't even remember. Jacques asks if the agents have connections to other organizations outside of the GMR, and Felicia replies in the negative. The man then asks if the agents ever disclosed classified GMR information to outsiders. Ray replies with displeasure that this has never happened and that it would be extremely stupid on their part. Jacques then asks if the agents are investigating Callum Wells' case, to which he answers in the affirmative. Jacques asks if they were in the room at the moment when the protagonist teleported out of prison. The agents begin to justify themselves, saying that they acted according to protocol and they could not have imagined that the criminal would escape. Jacques then asks whether the agents consider themselves competent employees of the organization. Felicia starts to get angry, but Ray tries to smooth things over and admits the duo's failure. However, the agent immediately objects, saying that in this case, they have more motivation to catch the criminal. Jacques says that under the direction of Archmage Har, he is relieving agents of their current duties. Both Felicia and Ray are outraged by this decision and object to Jacques. The man stands up from his seat and asks the agents to calm down because he is not removing them from the case completely, and besides, he wants to ask for help from the GMR since he believes that Wells has an informant inside the GMR. The next morning, Lucy's alarm clock rings, but she barely wakes up. A couple of minutes later, the girl rushes out of her apartment as she is very late for work. Upon arriving at the office, she is irritated that she is not a magician and cannot make her life easier with magic. Finally, the girl gets to her desk and turns on the computer. At work, Lucy sees a message ordering her to immediately go down to the first floor, which makes the hacker tense. On the first floor, the workers are met by Jacques, who says that if they have nothing to hide, then they have nothing to fear. Behind him stand Felicia and Ray, listening to Jacques as he explains that they will be calling in workers one by one for questioning. After a while, Lucy is called and first asked her full name. Felicia sits in front of the girl and uses her powers, which makes Lucy unable to lie. An agent from the GMR begins asking questions about Lucy's possible connection with someone outside the organization and demands that the girl answer the question honestly. Lucy carefully answers Felicia's questions without lying. Felicia asks the girl if Lucy knows anything about someone who is distributing classified information to people outside of the GMR. Lucy pretends and starts listing various personal things from the lives of colleagues, confusing the agents. Felicia interrupts the girl and asks what services Lucy provides to Chester, to which she receives the answer that she provides technical support. Felicia then asks if the girl is in a close relationship with someone other than GMR. Lucy is nervous and doesn't know how to answer this question, but in the end she pretends and tells the agents about her non-existent boyfriend. Felicia stops Lucy, saying that she doesn't care about her personal life, after which the girl is released. After this, Jacques, Felicia, and Ray summarize everything that was discovered during the interrogations. Felicia says she might be successful if the agents were upfront about why the interrogation was being conducted. Ray lights a cigarette and says that it is unwise to do so, because the organization does not need unnecessary rumors. Jacques approaches the man and asks if any magical traces were found while the workers were being interrogated. The man replies that only a few had personal magical observers, but otherwise, everything is clean. Jacques says he doesn't like the situation, but there's nothing he can do about it. Finally, the man suggests that the agents keep a close eye on Lucy. Meanwhile, the main character tests home bonds in the forest. Callum concludes that the teleportation devices work even better than he imagined. In the end, the guy only has to deliver the home bonds to the place indicated by Chester. However, before this, the guy decides to call Lucy and notify her about this. However, a moment later, Lucy does not respond, and the protagonist thinks that something has happened. Wells is tense because the GMR can track him right now, so he needs to come up with a better plan. Having thought everything through carefully, the main character destroys the SIM card from the phone. After this, Callum hurries to his motorcycle to leave that place as quickly as possible. A few hours later, when the home bond is delivered, the protagonist thinks about Lucy again and wonders what could have happened. Still thinking, Wells goes to get his home bond money. Sometime later, Lucy calls the protagonist and apologizes for not answering earlier. The girl explains that she needed time to make sure that all the devices were clean and that she was not being monitored by the GMR. Wells understands that the guild has taken his case seriously, and now things will not be easy. The hacker shares that she didn't think that GMRs could be so cruel. Lucy adds that when the GMR began checking workers, she became very uneasy. Callum reassures and encourages the girl, saying that he understands what it is like to be in an interrogation room. Lucy noticeably relaxes after the protagonist's words. The girl tells Wells that she intercepted a letter from the GMR about a couple that Callum rescued from the Fey Forest, who were captured by agents and are now being taken to the guild headquarters. Wells is shocked that Dad was caught, to which Lucy replies that it seems like the fairies themselves tracked them down and turned them over to the guild. Callum changes his plans and asks Lucy to find out all the information about the couple and where they are being held. Lucy says that there are hostages in the Miami office and also warns the protagonist to be on guard because now the GMR is more serious than ever. Arriving in Miami, Callum explores the area and senses how many creatures with unusual abilities there are. Having gone on reconnaissance closer to the GMR office, the guy notices how many guards there are around the guild office. Hiding in a secluded spot, the guy uses his energy to better determine what is inside the building and discovers that, surprisingly, there are many ordinary people working in the office. Wells knows he can't destroy the premises and needs to find a smarter way, so Callum assumes he can get the couple out without any unnecessary fighting. Therefore, the protagonist quickly contacts Lucy, who immediately asks how things are going with rescuing the couple. Callum explains that if two people were simply kidnapped from the office, they might be hunted, meaning they need to be hidden by someone important. Lucy takes up the guy's idea, and Wells asks who could help with this. Lucy frankly says that this is a difficult task, because not many creatures would want to cross the Archmage's path. There's no point in bringing Chester in, and Callum asks if there's anyone who's annoyed with the GMR's work. Lucy immediately remembers that since the guy saved this couple from the ferry, it makes sense to pay attention to them because the creatures love to fight with each other. The hacker adds that it might make sense to seek help from one of the Fey Kings in order to sow discord among the creatures. Wells is surprised by this proposal, to which Lucy says that it is worth a try. Lucy tells that King Jice, from whom Callum saved the couple, looked for the guy everywhere, but did not find him, so it makes sense to meet with some other king and annoy Jice that way. Lucy adds that she will organize a meeting and send the protagonist a letter with basic information. Sometime later, Callum contacts one of the Fey Kings through a portal. King Fair says with a smile that he will meet the guy on neutral territory, as agreed. Wells apologizes for deciding to contact the fairy so suddenly and says that he has a proposal that should interest the creature. The fairy asks the guy to continue, as he has intrigued him. Callum suggests an idea that would give GMR some extra pain, and also add a couple of problems for Jisoo. Fair listens attentively to the guy, but makes a sarcastic comment, saying that he didn't think the hero understood politics. Callum explains that he has no political interests, but he knows that some of his actions could lead to good consequences for Fair. The protagonist talks about a couple that the guild keeps with them, to which the fairy asks what relation they have to him. Wells says that the people are innocent, but if he saves them, they will still have problems. But if someone influential intervenes, this will not happen. Fair thinks about it and says that no matter what, it should be fun. And besides, seeing a famous criminal in action would be pretty cool. Callum interrupts Faye and says that he can't promise that he will put on any amazing show, but he still hopes that the offer is interesting to the king. Fur considers the offer, noticing how rare spatial magic is these days. Finally, Fair says that he can't directly save the couple, but he can help them if they accidentally end up on his territory, and he can play along. If this happens, he will pretend to be a noble master in front of the guild and protect the couple. Callum clarifies that he hopes they both agree on everything. Fe bows and says that he agrees to all the conditions. After finishing his conversation with Faye, Callum realizes that his reputation allows him to arrange such circumstances. The plan to save the couple is already ready. Now the guy needs to make his preparations to fulfill his part of the deal. After thoroughly studying the structure of the guild building, Callum discovers a small portal inside and understands how it can be used. To save the couple, he just needs to figure out this teleporter. The main character also needs to figure out how to transport the vehicle, as it won't be possible to carry two people away on a motorcycle unnoticed. Therefore, for such an operation, Wells acquires a small truck. The guy prepares all the necessary ingredients to distract the GMR agents during the operation. For a moment, the hero thinks that after the incident in Paris, he wanted to stay away from the guild, but he cannot leave an innocent couple in trouble. Upon arriving at a deserted place, Wells takes out all the previously prepared ingredients and begins to sort them out. The hero adds a small thread of vis energy to a jar of water, creating a storage from it that is much larger on the inside than it appears on the outside. Once the energy has been placed in the jar, it can then be used to collect and store all the water inside. Then small metal fragments are poured into the jar, and thus, as soon as the guy destroys the energy of the vis, the water will gush out and an explosion will occur. All that remains to be done now is to place the improvised weapon next to the GMR portal. The hero moves the cans inside the building, planning to blow them up in such a way as to destroy the portal and the surveillance network. A second later, the guy explodes the first can, causing panic in the guild office. While the workers are shocked and distracted by the explosions and trying to figure out the situation, Wells intends to rescue the couple. Using his abilities, the protagonist drags the couple through the created portal. The young people move into a truck where Wells sits behind the wheel and greets them. The guy runs up to Callum and asks what's going on here and why they're constantly being followed. The protagonist apologizes, saying that it is because of him that the couple has problems, to which they ask who he is. Wells replies that it doesn't matter and that after today, they won't see him again. The rescued guy doesn't calm down and continues to put pressure on Callum, saying that things won't go this way. But then a girl intervenes in the conversation and says that Wells is obviously saving them. Callum says he understands the couple and their concerns, but for him, this is now the reality of life. However, the couple is not involved in anything, so the main character wants to give them a second chance and the opportunity for a happy life. When asked where they are heading now, Wells replies that they are going to see some people with whom he made arrangements in advance. Suddenly, a police car appears behind the truck, demanding that the heroes stop. Callum, seeing this, is angry with himself because of the guild, he completely forgot about the regular police. Nevertheless, the protagonist decides to resolve the issue with the police as quickly as possible so as not to arouse the suspicions of the GMR. A police officer approaches a stopped car and says that he sensed something was wrong and wants to check the vehicle. Immediately, a couple appears from the back seat of the truck, pretending to be drunk. The young people make up a story that they are leaving a concert. The police officer says that according to safety regulations, they must be wearing seat belts, but the couple object, saying they are too comfortable and happy in the back. Finally, the policeman says he doesn't have time to deal with two drunks, so he asks Wells to take the couple home safely. Seeing guild agents prowling around near the car, Callum is about to leave, but the police officer stays for a second to remind Wells about the cleanliness of the rental car, after which he finally lets them go. On the way, the couple wonders what periodically happens to the car. Wells says that these are reinforcements, and they are almost at the safe zone. A few moments later, the heroes arrive at the bank, and Wells explains that they are in fairy territory and he is going to send them through a portal to safety. The guy adds that after teleporting to a new place, the couple should say that they came from a ghost and opens the teleport in front of the young people. The girl asks if Wells will go with them, to which the guy replies negatively, saying that he was not part of the deal. Callum encourages the couple by saying that his friend will contact them when things calm down. Finally, the couple goes to the teleport and finally thanks the main character. Sometime later, Felicia and Ray arrive at the scene in Miami and scold the agents there for losing the couple. The workers begin to justify themselves, saying that all the preparations went down the drain and that they did everything according to protocol. Ray responds that this was clearly not enough and that the agents did a poor job of their job. After letting them go, Felicia notices that Ray is angrier than usual today, to which he replies that he is worried about Felicia since she has problems with the local ferries in Miami. Felicia is visibly embarrassed, saying that there is no point in wasting time on her and worrying about her unnecessarily. Finally, the agents begin to explore the destroyed office, trying to figure out how it all happened. Ray says he looked everywhere, but found only metal debris and puddles of water. Suddenly, an archmage approaches the agents, who declares that the suspect is much stronger than they might think. Ray agrees with him and wonders to himself what the old man is even talking about. The archmage immediately declares that the agents must summon Archmage Duval here. Sometime later, Ray calls the archmage, but receives a negative tone due to the agent distracting her. Ray explains that they encountered the protagonist again, but were unable to catch him. For a moment, Duval doesn't understand why she's needed, to which Ray replies that she could do her expert analysis. The woman gets irritated and says that the agents are simply useless, but asks where it all happened. After some time, Duval arrives at the scene, but without listening to Ray to the end, he drives him away. In addition, the woman yells at the agent because he missed the criminal. Returning back to Felicia, Ray is irritated and very angry. Duval uses his skills and investigates the crime scene with energy, noting that Callum's magic is dangerous and at the same time careful. Having discovered the metal fragments, the Archmage says that the metal has absorbed most of the protagonist's energy. After examining the debris more closely, Duval suggests that the technology is somewhat similar to the bearings previously found by the Guild. In the end, the woman says that Callum is undoubtedly dangerous. The Archmage, who had spoken with the Guild agents earlier, approaches the woman, surprising Duval. The woman is angry that the man speaks in riddles and asks her to tell him directly what he needs. Archmage Wiz replies that he is simply interested in getting to know Wells and his techniques better. Moreover, it is possible that the old man's suspicions fall on something that should have come true long ago. The Archmage adds that he has sworn to catch and destroy mages who are not on the Guild's side. Duval, looking at the old man, knows that he is dangerous, although strange, and there are many rumors about him. Finally, the woman uses her magic to scare the old man away, to which he turns around and sells himself to Duval. Sometime later, agents Ray and Felicia, along with Buck, review Duval's analysis, which confirms that Wells used a sophisticated tool to pass undetected by the observers and the GMR network. Jacques adds that he still doesn't understand how he managed to do it from such a distance. Ray says they need to study the main character more, but first of all, they need to strengthen the Guild's observers. Felicia adds that agents won't be able to secure every GMR headquarters, but if they know where the next strike will be, they can be better prepared. Meanwhile, the protagonist ponders whether it is worth calling Lucy or whether it could be dangerous. Callum heads to New Mexico on a motorcycle to find a new place for himself. A few days later, Jacques meets with R and reports to him that the missing couple is under the care of the fairy and, moreover, their names have been erased from the agent's memories, making it impossible to catch them again. The Archmage says that the main character will work with the fairies, and what does the King of Miami say in this case? Jacques replies that it seems Fair is up to something, but being on his territory, the agent can't do anything. Har says that in that case, Callum could be pulled out of hiding, and since the couple escaped, there are others with whom the boy maintains contact who could become targets for the Guild. Jacques objects and says that if such contacts exist, then they are clearly under the protection of werewolves, and besides, some people he knew from the past are dragons. Har wearily notes that despite Wells having many acquaintances, it's worth looking at it from another perspective. Jacques says that someone is obviously leaking all the information to Callum, like about the couple in Miami. After this, Har tells his protege to find the informant and bring him to the Archmage. Meanwhile, Lucy comes to the bar and starts talking to the barmaid. The hacker complains about work and says that he's going to get completely drunk. The barmaid pours Lucy a drink and asks about work, to which the girl angrily explains that the entire office is suffering because of a recent information leak. Lucy also adds that it has been a week since she heard news from her friend, and she thinks that he is angry with her. The barmaid asks what Lucy did, to which the hacker replies that she told a friend about a job he might like. The girl also replies that she doesn't know whether she sent him there at his request or because she wanted it to be better for herself. Lucy adds that although everything ended well, if the job is dangerous, does that mean she is a bad person and put him in danger? The barmaid smiles and pours another glass for Lucy, telling her that she needs a drink. Suddenly, Callum calls the girl and asks if she is busy, to which the girl replies that she is wiping up rum that she accidentally spilled on herself. Wells admits that the GMR could cause him trouble for Lucy and apologizes to her for it. Lucy is surprised that the guy was worried about her and is embarrassed when he answers in the affirmative. The main character immediately explains to the girl that he is in Mexico and asks her for a map of the isthmus with markings on everything supernatural. Lucy immediately starts digging through her phone, getting ready to hand over such a card. After sending the data, Lucy asks if this is the only reason the protagonist called. The guy says that he forgot something and sincerely thanks the girl for her help. Lucy is embarrassed to hear such words from the guy. The protagonist adds that if the girl finds herself in trouble because of GMR, he will definitely help her. Lucy is embarrassed again, but says that she will definitely tell Wells if anything happens. Having finished the conversation, the girl returns back to the bar and wants to ask the barmaid a question. Lucy blushes and asks to be served a drink that will calm her down. The next day, Callum is in the office about to buy a property and is greeted by a man in a suit. Wells confirms that he would like to buy land and hopes to get recommendations for construction companies. The man sits down opposite the main character and asks what brought the guy to Mexico. Wells replies that his friends recommended this place and he is going to build a holiday home. The man replies that he will, to Callum's understanding that the prices here are quite high. The main character immediately takes a gold bar out of his bag and says that he is going to pay with it. Finally, the man says that the door is always open for Callum and he can come at any time. Meanwhile, the leaders of the magical world meet, and the vampire says that his territories are suffering. The Archmage tells his interlocutor that he is definitely not responsible for capturing criminal mages, so such questions should be left to the GMR. The vampire is furious, saying that the guild has failed to compensate for the losses and has not compensated for its irresponsible activities. The creature continues to tell the Archmage that the guild is doing nothing, to which the old man replies that everything that could be done has already been done. The old man also answers the vampire that the creature can independently search for new people for nests. In his residence, the vampire calls his assistant, Alas, for further instructions. The creature says that they themselves must do something to catch the criminal mage, and to do this, they can find someone among their acquaintances who can lead them to Callum. The vampire is referring to Clara Langley, a werewolf who needs to be found. The creature orders the girl to be brought to him so that she can lead the vampires to Callum Wells. Meanwhile, the werewolves report to Chester that the vampires have become active and are up to something. After talking with the werewolves a little more, the Alpha is convinced that he needs to be on guard. The man orders his assistants to summon Jasper to him, adding that apparently there is a reason to test the new home bond. A little later, Alpha calls Sheriff Langley and reports that the vampires are heading to Venute, to which Langley asks what needs to be done. Chester replies that he has arranged for the sheriff's family to stay with him. Langley asks the sheriff what will happen to Venute next, because the city can't just be abandoned. After talking with the sheriff, Chester is going to head to Wynneth to sort things out personally. Alpha's wife stands next to him and asks if he needs her help on the mission. Chester says that she shouldn't go anywhere and that he will handle everything himself, while the woman takes care of the Langley family. The wife warns her husband about the danger and tells him to be careful. When Chester objects that this is the duty of any Alpha, the woman says that the husband must still be careful. Later, members of the Langley family are teleported to Alpha and his family via home bond. Werewolves greet each other warmly. Sister tells Langley not to expect a long rest. The Alpha will quickly deal with the vampires and return. Chester approaches Jasper and learns that the assistant has already teleported most of the pack's comrades using a home bond. When Alpha asks about the device's functionality, Jasper says that he definitely has someone to thank. Chester orders Jasper to teleport the pack back after the Alpha signal. Sometime later, Chester teleports to the rest of the werewolves and learns that the vampires have not yet appeared. Alpha advises his allies to remain in wolf-fighting form as the vampires move quickly. One of the werewolves asks what about Chester himself, since he has not yet taken his form. Not far from Vint, vampires gather under the leadership of Alas, who notify him of their combat readiness. Sometime later, one of the werewolves notifies Chester that unknown figures were seen near them. Alpha quickly orders everyone to take their positions, saying that they are vampires. A second later, Chester himself finally assumes his wolf battle form. A few moments later, the vampires and werewolves encounter each other and begin to fight. Alas realizes that it wasn't Langley at all, which means the creatures somehow understood what the vampires were planning. The vampire understands that they have lost this battle, but Sister has finally decided to appear from the shadows. Deciding to test his luck, Alas charges at Chester, and the other wolves warn the Alpha about this. The vampire wounds the defender in the chest, holding his hand in the wound for a while. However, no matter how you look at it, the werewolf is stronger than the vampire, so Sestra easily tears Alas apart. The remaining vampires, seeing the enraged Alpha Chester, decide not to go further into battle and walk away. A little later, the werewolves run to the place where the fight took place, and one of the werewolves inquires about the condition of the Alpha. Chester says that the main vampire, Lavin, needs to send many more creatures to finish him off. After this, the werewolf reports on the condition of the other members of the pack, saying that no one has any serious injuries. Before heading back, Chester points out that the home bond is a very useful thing. And besides, if the werewolf were to use the GMR devices, the entire guild would be in an uproar. Finally, Chester thanks and praises his comrades, declaring that from this day forward, Venute is free from vampires. The next day, Callum works out in his motel room, knowing that the importance of exercise cannot be ignored. On the other hand, if a guy wants to stay near one of the portal worlds, then there is no need to worry about a lack of magic. After so much time using magic, Callum had become very accustomed to it, and it would be a sin to refuse such opportunities as his. Meanwhile, GMR agents Ray and Felicia find the guild office where a man tells the fairy to stop using her powers on the workers, to which Felicia replies that it is very convenient. The woman states that while people do all the dirty work, they can afford to rest in peace. Ray counters by saying that they're not relaxing, they're observing, and even if Felicia uses her powers on people, it's no reason to relax. Fairy tells his partner to calm down, because people get paid for their work, and after it's done, they won't even remember what they did, and then offers Ray a snack. However, one of the workers immediately approaches the agents and reports that he has found some interesting behavior among the reports. The worker recalls that Callum initially caused a stir among the vampires and acted very harshly. Reporting to Ray, the worker says that the guy is improving quickly and his attacks are already very calculated. Reading the document given by the worker, Ray agrees with him and asks what the guy wants to say. The worker says that Wells is a fast learner, which makes him very dangerous, and that people like Callum are often overconfident. He adds that Callum might overdo it and end up killing himself. Ray thanks the guy for the new thoughts, to which he says that he will continue to look through the reports. Felicia watches the guy leave and says that people are more useful than they imagined. Ray loudly announces that he wants to see all logs and records of Callum's interactions with any guild employees. Workers scan all the data, trying to find any information about the main character. Meanwhile, Jasper arrives to Lucy and is about to hand over the reward for the home bond, to which the girl asks to leave her the gold bars, which she will send to the exchanger herself. Jasper asks the hacker to be careful so that the GMR cannot track the girl. Lucy turns to Jasper with a smile and says that she is not that easy to catch. Meanwhile, the main character sits and sorts through the resources found in one of the magical worlds. The protagonist installed teleportation devices in several secure locations to move quickly. The only thing Callum needs to do now is decide where to put the remaining resources from the magical world. To do this, the main character decides to call Lucy so that she can advise him on something. The girl answers and tells the guy about the workload after the agents arrived and the emergence of new rules in the office. Wells apologizes for any inconvenience he may have caused the girl in this way. Lucy tells the guy that because of him, some of the workers were sent home to find out what happened in a calm environment. Callum says he's surprised Lucy was in the office during the GMR inspection, as she can work remotely. The hacker replies that the bosses are clearly behind the times, so there's no point in even mentioning remote work. The girl adds that because she now sits at home, she is bored, and besides Chester, she doesn't really have any friends. After all, in the office, the magicians consider her weak because she doesn't have magical abilities, and you can't talk much with ordinary people because you might let something slip. Lucy tells Callum that talking to him is her only solace and social interaction. The guy immediately asks about Chester, wondering if the werewolf would like to buy another teleportation plate. Lucy replies that the Alpha would be happy with such an offer, especially after the incident in Venute when the home bond proved very useful. The hacker calls Chester to have Wells explain everything directly, and the Alpha agrees, saying that the home bond is indeed needed. Chester asks for the device to be bigger this time, and Callum says he'll try to build something suitable. Lucy's boyfriend asks her to prepare a new place where he can put the goods. Meanwhile, Gale Har trains in the simulator, trying to escape from the monster. The girl hides from the enemy, unhappy that she is just a healer who was somehow forced to fight. After the monster discovers the girl, Gale takes off running to escape while remembering her training. As she moves, the girl gathers her vis energy as if she were going to heal, but instead, the girl turns to face her opponent. Stretching out her hand, the girl attacks the monster with her magic, killing it. However, she lacks strength and loses, causing the illusion to disappear and the person supervising the training to say that the girl failed again. While Gale silently considers what happened, the observer suggests that she run the simulation again. However, the girl walks away, telling the observer to watch his language. While the man stands in shock, Gale adds that since he can't train her properly, it's better for him to stand and remain silent. After the training, a woman meets the girl and asks how Gale is doing, to which she replies that everything went well and she is not satisfied with anything. When the conversation turns to finding Callum, Gale asks how the investigation is progressing, to which the woman replies that she hasn't heard anything. Gale shares that she heard about how Wells persuaded the Fae King to side with him. As she leaves, the girl asks the woman to keep her informed of all events regarding Callum. Gale admits that she never wanted to learn destructive healing and that it was all Wells's idea. It is because of the main character that Gale's relationship with her family has deteriorated and she wants revenge. A week later, the protagonist arrives at the point where his home bond money is located. In the end, the guy received about $1 million, even taking into account the fact that Lucy took some of it for herself for her help. Meanwhile, Chester asks his charges if the teleportation device is ready. One of the werewolves reports that placing the home bond in the house of the vampire leader Lavin was not easy, but by bribing the delivery men, they achieved their goal. Jasper asks Chester if it's a good idea to go to Lavin now that his men can be on guard. Chester replies that vampires are now more vulnerable than ever, so Jasper no longer objects to the Alpha. Using a home bond, the pack moves to the basement of Lavin's mansion. Chester addresses the werewolves, telling them not to assume their fighting form, and that kills should only be with weapons to ward off suspicion. Alpha approaches his protege Roy and tells him to take part of the squad and go assault the left wing. After the groups separate, Chester kills the vampires on one side. Roy and the other werewolves deal with the enemies on the other side. One of the werewolves approaches Chester and warns him that there is an armory ahead with 3 vampires inside. Chester steps forward, saying that he will assign the werewolf to deal with them, and he will go to Lavin. Alpha knocks down the door to the head vampire's office, and he is shocked by Chester's unexpected visit. Alpha says that it's all over, and the vampire is left alone. The vampire takes out a weapon, a sword made of the purest silverite. The vampire lunges at the werewolf, and Chester blocks the blow just in time. The vampire provokes the Alpha by asking if Chester really thought he could win the fight without transforming. Lavin urges the werewolf to fight fairly because that's exactly what Chester came here for. The werewolf stands still and declares that Lavin is not worth it, which surprises the vampire. Chester smiles and says that being a werewolf is not just about turning into fighting form. While Lavin doesn't understand what the Alpha is talking about, Roy sneaks up behind the vampire and stabs the vampire with a weapon. Exhausted, Lavin falls to his knees, and Chester approaches him, saying that this will serve as a lesson to the vampire. The werewolf explains that Lavin puts himself above his vampires. For him, they are just subordinates, but for werewolves, unity is above all else. After this, Chester kills the main vampire in Vinute. Having finished with this, Chester turns to the werewolves and says that they need to clean everything up here so that no one thinks that the werewolves did all this, and to get out of here as quickly as possible. A couple of days later, at the GMR office, one of the employees approaches Ray and reports suspicious money transfers from Lucy. Reading the report, Ray sees that the girl tried to hide it, but still made some mistakes, which is why she was spotted. The next day, Lucy comes to work and finds the office empty, even though she received an important letter that morning requiring her to report to work. Since the girl was alone, Lucy decided to make coffee and sit quietly at her workstation to wait for the others. For a second, the girl senses a catch, and before she can leave the workplace, Felicia appears and stops the girl with her abilities. Lucy doesn't move, realizing that she's trapped. Ray appears behind Felicia and says that Lucy has been caught conspiring with the criminal Wells, so from now on, she will be stripped of all duties and rights associated with the GMR and will be taken into custody. Meanwhile, the protagonist browses forums where the cities that are the centers of the magical world are listed. Callum calls Lucy for advice, as she should know more about this than he does. However, instead of the girl, Ray picks up the phone, introduces himself, and says that Lucy is with them. Before the agent can finish speaking, the guy breaks the phone with magic. Ray is a little confused and asks his assistant if they were able to trace the call, to which he receives a negative answer. Felicia suggests he call back and maybe he'll think they have a deal for him, but Ray says the guy is too cautious and that's impossible. Moreover, they did the main thing. They caught Lucy, so all that remains is to wait. Meanwhile, Wells is nervous, not knowing what to do next because he thought that Lucy was no longer in danger. The guy wonders how the agents were able to track the girl down and what methods they used. Gradually, the guy begins to destroy all the equipment he has in order to protect himself. Wells thinks what he should do next. He has a lot of money, so he can afford to buy real estate far from here and hide for a while. On the other hand, the guy promised to help and saved Lucy if something happened to her, so he can't leave her in trouble, but he can't cope alone. Invenuta Langley and her daughter are making out in a cafe as if nothing had happened. While Jessica argues with her father about the products that are being sold to them, both are unaware that a visitor has arrived. Langley didn't notice the stranger behind the boxes, but Jessica quickly noticed the guy. Callum came to the werewolves' cafe, which surprised them greatly. Meanwhile, GMR agents Felicia and Ray begin reinterrogating Lucy, first demanding that she state her full name. Felicia uses her skills to find out more information about the girl and her connection to Callum. Lucy gets even more nervous after each question. She visibly tenses up. Eventually, the girl begins to cry, still unanswered by some of the guild agents' questions. Meanwhile, Callum arrives for a personal meeting with Alpha Chester. The protagonist says that he came because of Lucy, who was captured by the guild. Chester says the girl was taken into custody yesterday, and it is unknown how long she was under surveillance. Wells asks if Chester knows where she is being held and how many people are guarding her. Chester says it's a difficult question, and even though Lucy isn't part of the pack, he still cares about her. Callum is nervous, and Chester is quick to reassure him, saying that he is willing to help, but the situation is indeed difficult. Alpha adds that he has werewolves working in the GMR office, but he needs to act carefully so as not to expose them too. Chester adds that they are not some kind of Avengers who decided to take justice into their own hands, and that such actions could declare war on the entire guild. However, the werewolf says that he is ready to make some concessions, but they must be hidden from other eyes. Chester starts to talk about his intentions, but Callum interrupts him, saying that his freedom is more important to him. The sister becomes tense, and Wells suggests that he listen to what Callum wants to do. Sometime later, Chester tells Callum about the GMR office, located deep in the dense forests. The only way to get there is by teleport. Alpha hands the boy the building's blueprints, but warns that they may be out of date. In response, Wells hands the werewolf a small teleportation device, asking Chester to pass it on to his people working in the guild. The sister agrees and takes the device, asking what the guy intends to do next. Meanwhile, Lucy is imprisoned in the guild prison, and she constantly repeats basic information about herself to calm herself down. Suddenly, someone approaches the camera and reaches out to the girl's head to heal her a little. Lucy becomes more alert in shock, not understanding what has been done to her. Gail stands in front of the camera, warning Lucy that she means no harm. She asks the hacker if she knows Callum Wells, to which Lucy replies that she has spoken to him but has never met him. Lucy wearily says that she doesn't know what else to say. She's already told everything she knew. Gail reassures the hacker, saying that she doesn't care what Lucy told the agents. She's interested in her own questions. Lucy looks at Gail as she listens to her talk about the spells Callum taught her and says she knows nothing about it. Gail snaps at the hacker, saying that because of the main character, her entire family has turned away from her. Lucy replies that Callum is clearly a good person, and she is sure of it. Gail says that in that case, he will come to Lucy's aid, to which the hacker confirms this, saying that the GMR know this. Gail doesn't move away from the camera and says that in that case, she will wait for the guy here. Meanwhile, GMR agents arrive at Lucy's father's to obtain signatures on the necessary documents. Ray says they are not hiding the hacker's location and are waiting for Callum to show up. Having received the required signature, the guild agent thanks Lucy's father and supports him. However, Lucy's father is not very upset about his daughter's fate, saying that she has been a stain on the house for a long time. Finally, the man tells Ray to finish everything as quickly as possible, to which he receives the agent's promise. Finally, Ray goes outside where Felicia is waiting for him and tells her that the document is signed. The man notices the fairy's confusion and asks if everything is okay. Felicia says that perhaps they should keep the girl in the fairy territory because it would be much more difficult to hide there. Ray chuckles and asks which king they should then turn to. Felicia replies that her family would have suggested a candidate, but Ray would be a fool to agree to that. The man notices that Felicia only talks about her family when she's worried, and the girl confirms this. She says that there are all sorts of rumors going around, and it would be scary if it suddenly turned out that the guy has fairy blood flowing inside him. Ray reassures his partner that everything they have planned should work. Upon arriving back at the office, the agents are met by Jacques, who asks Felicia if she can use suggestion magic. The man says with annoyance that in that case, King Rav needs to be involved, since he is the only one who is not involved in anything. Ray asks what the purpose of suggestion magic is, since they already have access to compulsion magic. Jacques replies that it's a precaution. In case they fail, they can put more pressure on Lucy. Ray tenses up and says that the girl has already been subjected to severe mental torture. Jacques asks Ray not to be a wimp, as the guild simply needs a backup plan. Jacques adds that due to the difficult situation, the risk of further betrayals within the guild cannot be ruled out, and that the protagonist has already made a pact with Chester and Fair. Considering that a large number of people work in the guild, it is impossible to keep track of everyone, and besides, one cannot be sure that there is only one traitor. As he leaves, Jacques asks the agents to get ready and find themselves some good equipment. Sometime later, the heads of the magical community gather together to discuss the current situation. Duval claims that Callum is a space mage, which means he belongs to her. Another magician replies that no one has been able to tame Wells, so how does Duval intend to act in that case? The woman says she's going to lock him in a vis wither and force him to cast a spell for decades. Jacques appears in the meeting room and reports that they have seized the teleportation plates from Chester. Jacques says that even so, the Alpha has no intention of starting a war with the guild. The vampire sitting next to him asks, what about the Venuta vampires that Wells killed? Jacques calms the vampire Dumas and says that as soon as they find the guy, they will sort out this issue too. Another mage says that he has studied all the guild reports and notes that most likely the guy is developing all the plans himself. Har gets up from his seat and says that since one magician is behind everything, there shouldn't be any problems with capturing him, because everyone present here has enough strength to resist Wells. However, another man says that he feels like they are underestimating the protagonist and asks Duval if she can somehow suppress the boy's spatial abilities. Duval says that spatial magic is not that simple, so it is difficult to answer right away. Duval adds that Callum is a criminal, and once they spot him, he won't escape. Meanwhile, the protagonist finds a secluded place to create a portal to save Lucy. Earlier, when the guy was still with Chester, he warned Wells that all the archmages and others would be waiting for him. Chester gives the protagonist a final warning, saying that this time, nothing will be so simple. The werewolf warns that the guild will use all its available resources and every agent to catch the guy. Every archmage will try to catch the criminal, hoping to imprison the guy forever. Before the start of the entire operation, the protagonist is just waiting for Chester's call, with a notification that the device is located in the GMR building. The guy thinks that if the Alpha doesn't fulfill his part of the plan, then Callum's whole plan will fall apart at the seams. Immediately, the main character begins to calm himself down, saying that everything will be fine and everything will work out. Finally receiving a response from the werewolf about success, Wells creates a portal and moves to a volcano in Guatemala. The guy approaches the crater with boiling lava below, getting ready to start executing the plan. Having activated the teleportation plate, the guy does not intend to pass through it, as it is too dangerous. Instead, he uses the device in his office as an antenna to better navigate the guild building. The guy uses his skills to detect weak spots inside the building and find the point to hit. Callum also finds Lucy sleeping inside and is reassured that she is okay. Wells is convinced that Chester was not lying and that there are agents everywhere in the building protecting Lucy. However, Wells calms down, realizing that he still has a chance of winning since GMR underestimated his abilities. The guy uses his magic to redirect lava from the volcano through a portal into the guild building. Callum knows that the element of surprise is his only advantage against the guild, so he must make the most of it. Meanwhile, all the archmages have already gathered in the guild office, and I expect the main character to appear any minute. One of them asks his assistant about Duval, to which he receives the answer that the archmage is restless and is patrolling the perimeter. The assistant starts talking about statistics about Callum's predicted appearance in the guild building, but doesn't have time to finish. Screams and squeals are heard everywhere, and heat from the lava appears. The magician rushes to protect his assistant, while simultaneously giving orders for protection. The man wonders how and when the protagonist was able to gain elemental magic, as there was no mention of it in the answers. The mage builds a barrier against lava, protecting himself and his assistant. The man asks what happened to the other teams and why no one is answering. The assistant replies that it looks like they are cut off from the network and no one can contact anyone. An enraged Har appears nearby, shouting that he will definitely catch Callum Wells. The mage moves forward to meet the rest of the archmage, saying that his barrier only covers a small area. Having met Duval, the mage asks the woman where the attacks are coming from. She replies that she is clearly not from here, because then she would have felt Wells' presence. At this time, the main character, already tired, counts down before proceeding with the next part of the plan.